One warm afternoon in the mansion, there was screaming. It was a maid asking for forgiveness. The maid was being punished by the mistress, and she couldn't understand how the maid dared to do it. Mistress didn't need the maid's apology. She just wanted to punish her. At this noise, the other maids and the butler came together and realized that Mistress was once again furious and was taking advantage of another maid, and it was not the first day she had behaved this way. Mistress knew that she was just running an errand, but at the same second, she wondered what kind of errand it was. It was strange because she was a marquise from a noble family and could do anything. Only she felt like she was forced to do something she didn't want to do. She didn't understand why she was so angry with this maid. Mistress stopped abusing the maid as she thought she had had enough and told her to pack her things and leave. Then, Mistress felt as if someone was controlling her. She was sure that she had been under control the whole time. But at the same second, her thoughts were interrupted by the maids who felt sorry for Mary, and the mistress shouted at them to get out of here. Then she sat down on the bed and again heard the voice telling her that if she couldn't keep them quiet, she should go to their rooms and throw things around and make a mess. But the marquise didn't want to do that. Then the voice suggested that she punish those maids who looked askance at her, but the marquise again refused. It was not her wish. When the glass wall in her mind collapsed, the marquise saw the girl she had been in her past life. She certainly didn't feel like beating that servant girl. She had turned a blind eye to it for some reason. The voice said again that it was time to torment and humiliate others, but she didn't want to and wasn't going to do it. She never wanted to be a cruel and mean person, and she didn't want to live like that. Then the voice called her its angel, and now there would be a piece of ice in her chest instead of her heart. She wanted to know what that voice was and who was speaking to her. Marquise wondered why this life was making her so unhappy. She even thought she was crazy. Her name was Noelle Einel, a marquise who was said to have behaved viciously and rudely, both in her own home and in social circles. And Noelle had just woken up. She thought she was going crazy, but luckily she was able to notice something as her past life flashed before her eyes. Noelle noticed that she had apparently been reborn into a character in one of those love stories that most people have heard of or even read about. Everything that had happened up to this point was like the contents of some book she had had in the past. She had been obsessed with torturing people before she remembered her old self, and realized that it was definitely someone else's influence and who the puppeteer was. She wouldn't be able to figure it out now, and there were more important things to do. If her name was Noelle, then she was the wife of Rupert, the protagonist of this novel. Suddenly, someone opened the door and entered the room. Then she asked why Rupert entered without knocking. Rupert Einel was the main character of the novel, and now her husband, he was also a ruthless and cruel man. If you met him on the battlefield, you would not see victory, but only death. It was also rumored that Rupert's armor and weapons were always drenched in blood. It was said that people were so afraid of him that they called him a demon. Of course, it was a love affair, and even a war-turned man could genuinely love someone. Noelle decided to ask if something was wrong, and then Rupert told her not to call him by his name because they weren't that close. So she addressed him as Marquis Rupert Einel. The Marquis also said that the treasury had been emptied in just a week, and he ordered the guilty party to be punished. But then he saw the whip on the floor and turned around and said they should go into the study because they had something to talk about. She remembered that his bookwife had been ruthless too, but the problem was that about a month later he killed her and their daughter. And so Noelle was determined to stop it. Noelle had no idea how it happened, as she remembered her past life while she was beating the maid. So then she decided to try and summarize the plot of that novel as briefly as possible. It was the love story of Rupert and the main character named Aisha Wren. The book told how the girl ran away from home and pretended to be a man because she dreamed of becoming a knight. Soon she joined the Black Crow troupe led by Marquis Einel, and this is where their story begins. The problem is that the story takes place after Rupert has killed his wife and child. Her relationship with Rupert had been terrible before. Their marriage was an arrangement. They didn't love each other, so it was just a deal. 7 years ago, Rupert killed all his brothers to get the title of Marquis of the Einel family. He wasn't the heir, but he managed to become a marquis and made a peace treaty with her bloody parents to marry her. He was hated because he was the illegitimate child who got the title. From the beginning, her attitude towards Rupert could only be described in one word. It was condescension, and that was the main reason why their relationship deteriorated. She spent a lot of money and was a servant, which eventually affected her authority, and she became the local madwoman as she threw herself at everyone for no reason. Rupert's past traumatized his psyche, so she took care of him. But no miracle happened and love didn't come. She understood why her husband treated her like that anyway, so she decided to take responsibility for the mistakes of the past and make Rupert hate her less. Luckily, her memories of her past life had come back to her, and now she knew what would happen in the near future. She had reached his office and was hesitant to go in, but then she got her thoughts together and knocked on the door, and when she heard permission to enter, she went into the office where Rupert was waiting for her. He was told that she had beaten the maid because her head was a mess. She was shocked that she had beaten a man because he hadn't combed his hair. It was just a misunderstanding, as she deserved a whipping for being involved in the theft. Rupert realized that to her, the girl was just a maid, but she was overreacting. Then she realized that the maids had seen everything and had spread false rumors without knowing the truth. Noelle said that was not why she hit her, and her husband asked her why she had hit her. She said the maid wanted to steal her necklace. Whether she succeeded or not, she would have beaten her anyway. But Rupert didn't believe her and said she was lying because he had already been told everything, and there was no point in her making excuses. He didn't know why she lied, but it wasn't the first time. Her main goal now was to make things right with him. Now it was important to show him that her character was different. Noelle admitted that she had overreacted and would send a healer to her and pay compensation. She also promised never to beat the maids again. Rupert asked how she was going to pay the compensation, since she had spent all her savings and he was not going to give her any more money. Noelle thought that if she sold her jewelry, she could pay the compensation, but she couldn't do that. She had to prove she was capable of something, so she said she'd go out and make some money. But Rupert was surprised and indignant at the same time at such a statement. He wondered how she would earn it if she knew any way of doing it. She came up to her and grabbed her hand and said that if it weren't for those weak hands that could even hold a sword, he wouldn't have to go to war. Then Noelle pulled her hand away and said that it would not be wise for her to follow his path. But he was right about that, for Noelle Ainul was good at spending money, but not good at earning it. But if she used the knowledge from her past life, she might be able to find a way. After thinking carefully, she asked her husband to lend her money, but he just said he wouldn't give her another penny. Then she explained that she didn't ask for it for nothing. She asked for a loan, and she was even willing to write a receipt. Rupert wondered what she was up to and how she could ever expect him to listen to her nonsense. Noelle realized that the situation was not a good one. The wife, who was in a terrible relationship with her husband, asked to borrow money. She said she wasn't up to anything and asked him to listen to her. He asked what she was going to do and told her to describe it in a nutshell. He wasn't going to listen to another heresy, so she had to think hard before he kicked her out. Then, she said in a nutshell that she wanted to invest in land. But in truth, she had never thought of such an investment, but now she didn't have time to think of something better. Rupert had always valued rationality and efficiency in people and quietly got rid of useless people. To pique the interest of such a person was like looking for a needle in a haystack. He mockingly asked if she even understood what an investment was and told her not to waste his time and to get out. Then she vowed that her idea wouldn't be a waste of time. She knew it was the only way to prove that she could be useful. Noelle begged him to give her a chance to explain everything. It was the only way to make him feel valued. Noelle knew he wouldn't believe her unless there were witnesses and told him to bring his assistant, Orden. Then Rupert said she was stranger than usual. He went to the window and told her to tell him more about what she meant, and pulled the rope and said that Orden would be right there. A short time later, Orden, Rupert's assistant, came in. Noelle thought he hadn't seen her either, and thought her an unworthy lady. But she was glad he wasn't one of those who lied about his attitude, so she asked him to be a witness. If Orden approved of her plan, she would find it easier to persuade Rupert. She laid out the map and remembered how he'd said he didn't want to waste time. So she decided to get right to the point. Noelle showed on a certain section of the map how much land she wanted to buy. Orden pointed out that the land was not fertile and was not suitable for farming. Then Rupert said with a laugh that he knew she would say nonsense again. Noelle expected such a reaction because the land was not fertile and there were no bodies of water, and even an observation post for his favorite war could not be built. The land was in disrepair and unused. but there was something worthwhile in the depths of the land. Then she said that there was no point in using the land itself, but the most important thing was underneath it. Orden was surprised and didn't know there was anything there. Noelle asked him not to interrupt her as the explanation would be long. She thought Orden knew about it and told her that in ancient times the continent had been divided into 4 territories, and so there were records of the division. Now they were reunited. In the past, each area had its own magic. The Marquis owned the lands of the Anal family in one of these territories, and she wanted to buy the land between the other 2. Rupert said that's why the land was perfect. It was on the border where the 2 magics mixed. That's why his estate had farming problems, but he still didn't understand what it was all about. Then Noelle pointed out a place on the map where it was even worse, because 3 magics mixed together, so it was cheap. Orden said cheap didn't mean good, but it could be useful. But she'd already said it wasn't the land itself that mattered. Rupert said Noelle said there was something there, and she nodded. Noelle said that she had said that there was something there, only those who had lived on those lands in ancient times knew about it, and she had learned that it was the greediest race. Eventually that race died out, but it didn't want to leave the treasure. The bodies of the inhabitants were left lying right in the middle of the wealth they had accumulated. Then someone asked what race it was. Then Noelle said it wasn't well known, and it was the dragons. It sounded like science fiction, but in this world dragons did exist. Now when they were discovered, their remains were nicely attributed to dinosaurs, but they did exist separately from each other. Then she said that if they excavated in those lands, they would find the tomb of the dragons, and there would be piles of gold, silver, and something else, and the remains of the dragons themselves. Orden was surprised, as the nature of dragons was not yet fully understood, and he did not understand how she knew so much about them. Rupert was also surprised, as he didn't understand how she knew so much about them. Then Noelle realized that the remains of the dragons had not yet been found, nor were there any signs of mixed magic, and that everything would be discovered in future academic studies. Noelle decided to say that it would soon be published in academic studies. Orden asked where she got this information from, and she realized it was time to lie. She said that her relative Michael had told her that there would soon be an article about it, and then everyone would know, and Rupert remembered that he was that archmage. Michael Barris was the most famous archmage in the Empire, and a distant relative she had been close to since childhood. Though they didn't see each other now, they communicated through letters. After listening to Noelle, Orden decided that if that was the case, they should check it out. Rupert thought she was up to something, but she didn't see why she would. Then he said she would never do anything that would benefit his family, but she knew that with all her misdeeds he was right to suspect her. But Noelle said she had only good intentions this time and asked him to believe her. But Rupert knew that people didn't change overnight. Then he couldn't stand it any longer and grabbed her by the shoulders and asked her again who had put her on the case. He asked her who she had been having fun with, and her patron must have made her say all this to get his money, and her patron had obviously brainwashed her, for she had even implicated Michael. Then Noelle's patience was wearing thin, and she was outraged at the nonsense he had said. Rupert said he would investigate the matter, but she didn't understand how he would do it. But her husband was surprised that she kept standing her ground. After a few minutes of bickering, Rupert suggested a simple arrangement. He would lend her the amount she needed, but the contract would be entirely on his terms. Noelle said that it might not be profitable at all and wanted to know exactly what he wanted from her. He realized that since she was asking about it, she was in agreement and asked Orden to prepare the papers. When they had drawn up the contract, Rupert gave it to his wife to read. The first of the main things was that she was to pay back 5 times what he would lend her. If what she said was true and there was something there, she would have no problem paying her husband back. Even with those terms, she could do it, but he made them up because he still thought the money would go to some man she didn't even have. So she decided to agree to the arrangement to put her husband's doubts to rest. Her husband liked her attitude, but she had to listen to the rest of the story as it was not all. The second condition was that if she didn't return the money, she would go to live in the annex, and she would lose all the privileges of her family anal and would not be allowed to go out except in case of emergency. And she would no longer be able to beat the maids whenever she wanted, but she had no choice but to agree. Then she realized that he was going to make his wife a subordinate and limit her freedom. And he'd confirmed it, because he couldn't just watch her trample his family's name in the dirt. Noelle realized that, in the end, everything she said meant nothing to him. Then Rupert realized that she was putting her life on the line. If she made a mistake, it would be just an excuse for him to take her name away. It was his way of showing how much he hated his wife. Then he asked if she'd agree to the treaty. Noelle saw that the contract fortunately had some good points for her, like the clause that guaranteed her a share if there was a profit on the investment. She knew she'd be a fool to agree to the contract, but in the end she agreed, but added that when they explored the land, she wanted the Black Crows to be involved, but her husband didn't understand why. This squad consisted of people that Rupert had personally selected after checking their skills. There were many strong knights in their squad, and some were considered the best in the Empire. In the plot of the novel, the main character was also a member of the Black Crows. Noelle explained that she wanted the presence of the Black Crows as they were the most trustworthy, and Rupert agreed. So she took a pen and signed the contract. Surely her husband must have thought she was clinging to him, and then she was going to leave. In any case, the knights could help her not perish in those lands, though that didn't mean all her problems were solved. She hoped that after these events, Rupert's hatred for her would subside. After a while, he sent Black Crows to those lands as promised. Then one of the Black Crows asked the commander why they were ordered to check the area so suddenly. Then the commander said that their master didn't need a special reason, and Lauren needed to watch his tongue. It was clear to Laurent he had also heard that the order came not from the Lord's name, but from his wife. He didn't understand what could have been in the bloody desert. Hillis told Sir Laurent to be more careful as he knew about the code of the knights. They were not allowed to mock a lady, especially a blue blood. Laurent wanted to say something again, but the commander warned him, and then Hillis told Laurent to learn from Sir Aaron. Even though he had only recently joined their ranks, they would have to see how calm he was. After a couple minutes, Aaron said he had a strange feeling. Then he jumped off his horse and tapped the ground with his sword. Hillis didn't understand what he was doing, and then he said there was a sound coming from underground. He was sure there was something under the ground. The commander ordered Sir Laurent to fill his sword with magic and check the place. When he filled his sword with magic, he stuck it in the ground and nothing happened, but as soon as he turned around and wanted to tell the commander, he fell underground, and Aaron said they should go after him. So Aaron and Hillis followed him down the tunnel and couldn't believe what they saw. They found treasure and the remains of a dragon. It was the dragon's tomb. Of the three of them, Aaron walked over to the treasure and took the coin and tossed it, and after it landed on his hand, it jingled, acknowledging that the Marquis was right. The next day, she walked down the corridor with a heavy sack, and when she reached the study, she entered it and threw the sack on the table in front of her husband. Noelle wondered if he had anything to say to her. She expected an apology from him. He was puzzled that she wanted to hear him apologize, even though he had never apologized to anyone. Rupert agreed and had to say that he had doubted his wife for nothing, and apologized, saying that he was at fault. She watched his expression with joy, for he obviously felt humiliated because no one had forced him to apologize. So she accepted his apology. Rupert noticed that something had been wrong with her lately, and Noelle said that it was a gesture of reconciliation to live happily ever after. Her husband thought that since it wasn't her lover and he hadn't encouraged her to do it, and she hadn't stolen the money, he didn't understand why or why not. But she only said there was no secret meaning. He still couldn't believe she wasn't up to anything bad. From the first day they'd met, all she'd done was cast scornful glances in her husband's direction. She couldn't believe that she'd always cursed the day he was born. She knew all the sins of her heroine, and it was only natural that Rupert's hostility would not disappear overnight. Rupert still didn't understand why she was acting like an innocent sheep now. He thought perhaps her parents were up to something, but they weren't. He still couldn't accept her good intentions. Noelle said she wanted a quiet and happy life. Investing, admitting her mistakes, and not abusing the maids wasn't part of some devious plan. She just wanted to get closer. He didn't understand how she could say such a thing, though it was pointless to ask her anyway because she would lie. Then he told her to leave and she turned and wished him a good job. Their relationship with Rupert had not gotten any better, and thanks to the dragon tomb Noelle had found, she had been able to pay off her debt and earn several times what Rupert had given her for personal expenses. She was left with the most important problem of saving herself and her daughter. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Her husband's level of trust in Noelle was extremely low, But his hatred was the opposite, and it was the worst kind of relationship. Then her daughter snapped her out of her reverie. She was spending time with her daughter drinking tea in the garden. Her daughter's name was Leah. She had golden hair like her mother, and from Rupert she inherited the red color of her eyes. Their little girl had unwittingly become part of her and Rupert's terrible relationship. She had just turned 5, but despite her young age, she saw Noelle as her own mother. But until now, neither Noelle nor Rupert had been interested in raising the child. Not only were they a terrible couple, but he lacked the humanity to love his own daughter. So they always left her to the servants, and the girl grew up without parental love. But when the Marquise remembered her past life, the memories of her heroine came back to her, and she felt the desire to hit herself for everything she had done. It seemed to her that then she really went off the rails and neglected and mistreated her daughter. But thankfully, her sanity had returned to her, and from now on, she would take care of her as a mother should. Noelle hoped that they could become closer before it was too late, and she decided to ask her what Leah liked lately. Then her daughter answered that she liked studying, but Noelle knew she was lying because she wanted to be praised. Noelle said that her daughter could have told the truth because everything was fine, and she would be happy to know that she was happy about something. Leah couldn't believe what she heard from her mother, who had never asked her about it. Then she replied that she liked to draw, and then her mother asked her to show her drawings. So Leah brought a drawing of their family. Noelle was a disgusting mother, but her daughter had drawn her as such a bright person. Then she asked Leah why she hadn't drawn her daddy's face, but Leah said she couldn't remember what he looked like because he was always busy. Leah thought that her mom was mad at her, but she got up from her seat and went to her daughter and hugged her and said that she wasn't mad, and asked her to forgive her for spending too little time with Leah. In the near future, this cutie would be killed by her own father. Then she asked her daughter to call her mommy, but she said she was embarrassed to call her that. She was a marvelous and simply beautiful daughter. It was her daughter. The maid had already come in for more tea. Noelle decided it was time for her to behave like a marquise and asked for a cup. As the maid poured the tea, Noelle noticed her hands shaking. It was the first time she had seen this girl, and it must have been a new maid, and she must have heard rumors of her misdeeds. The maid was so worried and shaking that she dropped the kettle of hot tea on Leah's hand. The maids ran up to the Marquise and worried that she wouldn't get hurt, and Noelle said she was fine and they had to take care of the baby. But the maids froze, not knowing what to do, and Noelle herself took her daughter in her arms and carried her to the small pool and dipped her hand in the cool water. When she asked her daughter how much her arm hurt, she said it didn't. The Marquise realized that even in such a situation, her daughter was afraid that she would scold her. She kissed her on the forehead and told her that when she was hurt, it was normal to cry because of such a trifle she would not hate her. Then the girl cried from this comfort even more. Leah endured the pain to get her parents' love and approval. Then they went home, and the Marquise saw that the burn was small, and the tea was not very hot, but still blisters appeared on the skin. Then she told her daughter not to worry because a doctor would come and treat her and everything would heal. The doctor finally came and examined the burn and said that the blister would probably have to be opened. When the Marquise saw how horrified her daughter was, she asked the doctor if there were other options, but the doctor said they had no other choice. But she wanted him to explain it to her in detail. Then the healer said it was a common procedure and usually burns healed faster if the blister was opened. Then she thought that he thought she was a fool, and how could a normal healer look down on her? But she also knew that if she got angry, there would be more horrible rumors about her. As soon as her memories of her past life came back to her, she remembered working in a hospital, which meant she knew a thing or two about medicine. Then she said confidently that there was no need to open anything up, and on the contrary, it was dangerous because she could catch an infection. The treatment also depended on the extent of the burn. It would heal faster if you opened the blister, but that would increase the chance of germs getting into the wound, so it was better to leave it as it was. Then, Noelle said he could have done nothing, and not even a scar would remain, if he was the honorable healer of the anal family. Then the man said that she must have been talking about the teacher, and he told her that he had gone away for a while on business. She understood why he had decided to open the blister, as he had no experience, and it was obvious that he had just decided to do what he had read about in books or heard from his teacher. So she decided what they would do. She said that he would just observe and not interfere, but if it got worse, he would open the blister. After the manipulations were done, the healer said he would now apply the bandage, but because she was yanking her arm, he couldn't do anything. Noelle told the healer to give the bandages to her, and she would do it herself. She went over to her daughter and asked her to show her her arm. Then she took out a bandage and said that she remembered her daughter saying that she liked to draw, and at that moment she started to apply the bandage and asked her daughter to tell her what she liked to draw the most. And while she distracted her daughter with conversation from the pain, she was able to quickly finish with the bandaging. Noelle also turned to the healer and told him to do the same the next time he treated children. He was surprised that she did it better than he did, even though he'd been trained in it for 2 years, and realized that he needed to study even harder. Then the maid fell to her knees and begged not to be beaten and begged for forgiveness. Noelle realized it was time to deal with other problems. She asked Leah in a whisper what she would do to her aunt who had spilled tea on her. Then the girl, after a little thought, told her mom in her ear that she didn't want her to hit her. Noelle already thought that her daughter hated her for that, but she said that she didn't like her mom to be looked at badly, and she would like everyone to know that her mom was very beautiful, kind, and wonderful. So they decided to come up with a punishment for the maid, and the little girl suggested that she help her, and her mom approved. Noelle put her daughter down and asked her what the maid's name was, and she said her name was Jenna. She asked if she realized she had made a mistake, and she lowered herself to the floor again to apologize. The Marquise realized that it was not necessary to be too strict, even with such a high status as she had, but it was not necessary to appear too soft towards her subordinates either, so she said that if it had happened to her, she would not have left it like that. She also said that her daughter had decided to do things her own way, and Noelle decided to listen to her and told Jenna to stand up. The other maids couldn't believe the Marquise would end it there. She told the maid that until her daughter's arm was healed, Jenna would always be there to help her, and the maid was relieved to say that she understood. Jenna thanked her mistress and said she would do her best to take care of the little mistress. Noelle warned her that if she made the same mistake, she could consider herself fired. The maids feared her as much as they hated her, but the time had come for her to take on a new staff, and this would be the perfect opportunity to change their opinion of her. The maids were glad that mistress had let their friend go so easily. The Marquise hoped that today's situation would make them treat her better. Noelle kept admiring what a good daughter she had, and she had to change the future where the little girl would be killed, but she didn't know how to do it. She kept thinking about it because in less than 3 weeks, Rupert would kill them in cold blood. The next day, Jenna said mistress had changed. Another maid had heard that she had invested in the land where the treasure had been found, and that she had let Jenna go so easily despite her scalding Leah with boiling water. Jenna also added that mistress had healed little mistress's burns herself. Jenna also said that they trusted the stories of the elders and trembled at the sight of mistress, but she was very different from all the rumors. The girl with dark hair asked her how there were stories of her abusing her own child. But Jenna rudely replied that it was false nonsense and slander, and they were in a great relationship. The girl didn't understand why Jenna was so angry, and Jenna told her that she had found out the truth because Leah loved mistress very much, and she didn't think she could hurt the girl. Then the dark-haired maid said that the elders had lied to them. At that moment, Orden came to them and asked them what their meeting was about. He wanted them to stop talking and get down to business. Orden went to Rupert's office and knocked on the door. Then the gentleman asked him to put his papers somewhere, and if he had nothing to say, he could sit down. Rupert felt that Orden had something to say, and he told him that it was about the lady. Orden suggested that he too had probably noticed that her behavior had changed a lot lately, and that the maids had spoken quite well of her. Besides, all the treasures and information Lady Noelle had given them had been confirmed, and even if she had found out about it by accident, she had still explained it in detail. He found it hard to believe that a relative of hers had taken the knowledge and shared it with her, and Rupert found it implausible too. Orden also added that he had never seen her read books, and Rupert knew it. Then Orden said that given all this, he thought the master would agree with him that the mistress had changed suddenly. But Rupert himself had no thoughts on the matter, and found it hard to say anything. Then he remembered how she had said she wanted to get closer, but he took it as a lie. He asked Orden why he suddenly cared about the rumors, because it wasn't like him. Rupert thought that she would never change and that all this behavior was a farce. Auden thought so himself, and then Rupert added that the treasure was pure luck, as well as the information she had given him, and he was sure that she would soon be released, and everything would go back to the way it was before, and it would be fine if it was as the gentleman had said, but Auden asked if she had not lied about her desires. The Marquis said that in that case it would be even easier, and he would just kick her out, and that would be the end of it. He didn't need the support of Noelle's family anymore, and he was tired of turning a blind eye to her antics, and as soon as she crossed the line, he would throw her out. Then the assistant had nothing more to say and left. After the assistant left, Rupert went to the window and looked out, thinking that she couldn't have told him the truth. He watched Noelle playing in the garden with their daughter and thought it was simply impossible. Rupert would kill Noelle and Leah because he was cursed, and the novel didn't go into detail about exactly how the curse was cast. If the spell was not periodically broken, Rupert would lose control of himself and could easily kill someone. If the magic wasn't suppressed, it would eventually make Rupert kill them. And it wasn't just the curse with the way he treated her. He'd kill Noelle if she just got in the way. Luckily, she knew how to break the curse. There were 2 ways in the novel. The first was murder, and the second was true love. The second option she could rule out right away, because if she tried to do that, she would be finished. She didn't know what she should do about it, and wondered what she would do on the day Rupert couldn't control himself. She even thought of running away, but that would be fine if she was alone. She would run away right away. But there was Leah. She thought that maybe if she got to know her husband better, she could sort out the problem. After recent events, he'd apologized. At least Rupert kept his word. If only his warnings about her had disappeared, or someone had dispelled doubts about her, he would have listened. She had changed, and so events should not have happened as in the original novel. Despite the curse, she had to find out if there was any humanity left in him, and then think about escaping. Only she didn't know what he had to do to make her see that he hadn't turned into a monster yet. Then she decided to look at his attitude toward Leah and see if Rupert could be a good father, though considering that he had no affection for her at all, it might have a bad effect on her, and then they would have to run away. After that, she watched him for 3 days. The only problem was that he wasn't interested in Leah at all, and she didn't understand how a father could not visit his daughter at all. She didn't have high hopes for success, but she didn't think it would be that bad. While she was talking to her daughter, a maid came to tell her that the Marquis wanted to see Noelle. She went to his study, and Rupert asked her what she had been doing lately. She had been doing all sorts of ordinary things, and she asked what he meant. Then Rupert closed the book and loomed over Noelle and told her not to pretend that she didn't understand, because she had been following him these past few days. Rupert thought she was definitely up to something. Noelle was surprised that he'd noticed her. He asked how she could have decided that she would follow him and he wouldn't even notice. She explained that she had no intentions and just wanted to observe what kind of relationship he had with Leah. He then said he didn't understand her. She told him that Leah had recently shown her a drawing of their family and he had no face there, so he didn't understand why he couldn't just look into the face of his sweet, charming, and kind daughter. She just couldn't believe it. Rupert was surprised that it was over such a small thing. Noel was indignant that his own daughter was such a small thing to him. Then he asked if she herself had cared about her daughter until recently, and then she remembered how her character had behaved. Noelle said she knew she'd made a mistake, but in the future she'd do her best to fix it. She might not be a good mom, but she would do her best. So she asked her husband to take some time for her. She knew he hated her, but it wasn't her fault. Rupert didn't understand why she cared so much and why she suddenly wanted to play mommy. Then she said that he had asked in all sincerity and thought he was just a piece of ice instead of a heart, for he could spare a little time. But Rupert didn't understand why she asked him to do it, for Leah had babysitters and a couple of teachers' maids and food and clothes and lots of toys and everything a child needed. He didn't understand why she was still demanding something from him, because even if she didn't do anything, she could take care of herself. Then Noelle asked him if he even knew he was her father, but he dismissed it as he still didn't understand what she wanted from him and wanted to end this pointless conversation, and it was a waste of time. Then Noelle realized that she was talking to him like a wall. Then she turned around and agreed with him, but said that they would continue later and asked him to think about what she was saying because she wasn't just asking for Leah's sake, it would be good for him too. And then he stood there, shocked by that statement. And just as he told her to stop, she slammed the door behind her. After she left his office, she wondered if he could never be a real father. Already in the evening, the Marquis sat and signed the documents and remembered the conversation with his wife that had taken place in the afternoon. He couldn't even imagine what Noel was up to. Suddenly, he was called by a voice that told him that he had to become the worst man in the world. He had to kill and rob and breathe war to become a real villain, because that way he could desecrate and destroy the reputation of this family. Then Orden entered the office and informed the Lord that the prisoners were ready and they could go right away, and Rupert was ready. On the way to the dungeon, he asked Orden how many men there were today, and he said there were 3 and it wasn't enough for Rupert. Orden said that ever since the rumors had spread that criminals were not spared on their estate, the crime rate had dropped dramatically, and Rupert was glad for that. He had done everything because of his curse, but he didn't even think it would do people any good. He entered the cell and was greeted by the prisoners, and Rupert said that he had been informed that they had caused a disturbance on his property. They said they would never do such a thing, but Rupert had already read the report on all their crimes, so they shouldn't have lied. Then he listed their crimes one by one, and one of the men begged him to take pity on him because he was so sorry. Rupert didn't care if he was sorry or not. He just wanted to kill someone, and they were perfect for it. And that was all that mattered. He realized that these guys wanted to beg for forgiveness and start a new life, but he was in a hurry to make them sad because they were going to die, and he drew his sword on them. When he was done with them, he heard the voice again saying that killing would be the main joy of his life. After talking to Rupert, it had been a couple of days, which meant that he and Leah were as close to death at the hands of the Marquis. The situation was getting worse by the day. Rupert didn't change his attitude. He didn't talk to Noel or see Leah. Sitting on the bed, she wondered what kind of curse it was because he needed to kill people to keep from going mad. In the novel, her character died during a fight with Rupert, who had been holding back the bloodlust caused by the curse all along. Then she screamed at him and said that he was a terrible person and everyone would be better off if he had never been born. And those words were the last straw. Rupert desperately resisted the alien will within him, but after her words, he could no longer do so, and the curse took hold of him. Leah heard their argument and was very frightened, and walked over to her father and clung to him fearfully. The curse prevented him from thinking straight, and only when he had gotten enough blood did it give Rupert back control over his body and soul. The story in the book began with Rupert being tormented by intense guilt. She wondered if she couldn't just not fight with him, and if the curse works like a time bomb, then Leah's good memories in such an atmosphere became a huge problem. Even if she could avoid a fight and be alive when Rupert started dating the main character, what would Noel do then? What would happen to her after he fell in love with her? While Noel was sitting and thinking about the future, she heard a strange noise outside the door at a late hour. When she went out into the hallway, she saw blood and thought someone had hurt themselves. And she saw that the trail went towards Rupert's room. She thought maybe the Marquis had killed someone or it was his blood and he was hurt. She didn't even know if she should go in, but when she opened the door, she saw him lying on the bed, wounded. Noel ran into the room asking if he was okay. She also saw that there was a deep cut across his back. Rupert was surprised to see her in his room and told her not to make a fuss like last time, and she should just leave. Noel wondered how he'd talk this time because the wound looked deep. Rupert kept telling her to go away, but Noel said he'd better keep his mouth shut. He was surprised at the way his wife spoke to him, and Noel could see that the wound was serious and needed a healer. He crawled over to her and grabbed her arm and told her to stop and not to call anyone. Noel threw his hand away and didn't understand what he thought she was supposed to do, watching him bleed and waiting for him to die. But Rupert told her to leave him alone. Then she said he was very stubborn and she wanted to hit him, but her conscience wouldn't let her hit the wounded. He asked her again not to be so annoying and wanted her to leave. He had no strength left. Rupert again threatened her to leave, but she crossed her arms over her chest and refused him, and he was annoyed and surprised at her refusal. The Marquise went to the locker and said that the first thing to do was to stop the blood and stitch up the wound, and she wanted to find something in the locker to treat it. Then she found a bottle of liquor, and it would be a good antiseptic, and with any luck, it would keep the infection out of the blood. Rupert understood what his wife was up to, and she said that she wanted to fix him up because he had refused a healer, so she would have to do it. Rupert could not allow it, for she had no experience, So he repeated to her that there was no need to worry about such a scratch and that she should go back to her room. She turned around and shouted at him in surprise and told him that until she had sewed it up stitch by stitch, she was not going anywhere. So she asked him to shut his mouth and sit still. Rupert was surprised that she spoke as if she wanted him to live. Noelle asked if it was abnormal and should have been different, or if he wanted to hear her pray that he would die sooner. Then with his head down, he pointed with his hand to the box and told her to open it. When Noelle went to the table and opened the box, she saw the medical needles and realized that this was not the first time something like this had happened. Then he said he could do without asking, and Noelle thought that maybe he had some painkillers and adrenaline somewhere, because Rupert would be in a lot of pain if she started sewing without them. Rupert said that the adrenaline was on the bottom shelf and the painkillers, and then he stammered and asked her to just give him the bottle. Noelle was surprised that he asked for a bottle instead of anesthesia. Rupert drank enough, and then Noelle handed him a thick cloth and asked him to clench it in his teeth. She proceeded to sew up the wound, and though not on purpose, she still hurt him, but Rupert held on well. After a while, Noelle was almost done, and as she wiped her forehead with sweat, she accidentally blew air onto Rupert's neck, and he shuddered as if he had goosebumps. She noticed it, and also noticed him drop a piece of cloth on the floor, and she didn't realize what it was because she hadn't finished yet. Then blushing, Rupert said she was too close to him. She said he'd have to bear with her as much as he hated her. Rupert was surprised and didn't know she was capable of such a thing, and decided to find out where she had learned it. Noelle lied and said it was her first time doing it, and it wasn't much different from regular sewing, and even though the leather was a little thicker than the fabric. When she was done, Rupert said she'd done pretty well. That was when she first heard him compliment her. The Marquise said that he could go to bed now, but he asked what she would do, and she said that she would sit there and watch for a fever, and if that happened, she would call a doctor, no matter what he said. Then Rupert asked why she hadn't asked where he had hurt himself, and Noelle thought it was connected to the curse. Noelle asked if he would tell her if he did, and he said no. Rupert had no idea what thoughts were in her head. Noelle jokingly told him not to worry because she wasn't going to stab him in the back, so she took the bottle and asked him if he wanted another drink to help him fall asleep. He turned on the other side and refused, saying that today she was acting suspiciously, that he even thought she was human. Then she wondered what he usually thought she was. Rupert also added that he didn't want to drink so he wouldn't do anything stupid drunk, and Noelle thought it might be worse than a full back wound. He dismissed it as not what he meant, and then said it didn't matter and she didn't need to know. The next night, Orden reported that the monsters were becoming more frequent, but he also said that the master didn't have to go there. But Rupert realized that Orden knew why he was doing it. Orden knew that the Lord was going there to break the curse, and killing monsters was a good way to do it. It had only been a few days since he had executed those 3 men, and so it seemed to Orden that he was leaving too soon. He thought Rupert should have brought his knights with him as an escort, but he refused. Rupert didn't want them as he thought they would only get in the way. Later, after this trip, he returned with a wound on his back. When Noelle was tired, she went back to bed, and now her husband was watching her. Just when he wanted to touch her hair, Noelle turned, and Rupert quickly yanked his hand away. When Noelle woke up in the morning, she didn't realize how she had ended up in her room. She remembered exactly that she had been watching Rupert and had fallen asleep in his bedroom. Then she dressed and went out into the hallway and saw that there was no trace of blood on the floor and thought she had dreamed it. She went to the Marquise's room and saw that the room was empty. There was a piece of cloth on the bed, and then she realized that it was not a dream, and Rupert had just gotten rid of the marks. She then went to her room where the maids helped her dress and comb her hair. The Marquise was worried about where her husband had gone, for his wound would take a long time to recover from. Noelle knew that Rupert was stronger than usual because of the curse, but she didn't think he was that strong, and she wondered if he felt any pain at all. As she walked down the hallway, she heard the angelic voice of her daughter looking for her mom, and then she called out for Leah. Then, walking down the hall with her daughter, she hoped that the moment would come when the Marquis would communicate with his daughter. A few days later, Noelle's room was filled with many different dresses, jewelry, and gifts. She asked the maid where it all came from, and she said that it was sent by the Marquis. Noelle was surprised and didn't understand why the Marquis would give her such gifts, and she decided to ask the maid, but she didn't know. Noelle realized that it was pointless to ask the maids because she had no way of knowing. So she asked if the Marquis was home today, and the maid said yes. She liked all these beautiful things, but when she thought of who had sent them, it was embarrassing, and she decided to go and ask him herself. Noelle saw the Marquis down the hall and started to call out to him, but he stubbornly ignored her until she called his name, and only then did he turn around. She was tired of chasing him and thought he'd decided to pretend to be deaf, but he claimed he really hadn't heard anything. When she caught her breath, she said she wanted to ask what that pile of presents in her room was. Rupert replied briefly that it was payment for work. She was delighted that it was for curing his wound. Noelle also said that she hadn't seen him once since that day and thought he was avoiding her, but Rupert said he just had a lot to do. Rupert thought she had a problem with that, and then the Marquis said it was strange since he gave her so many beautiful and expensive things because he was the man who hated her more than anyone else in the world. Then she touched his forehead and thought he had a fever. But there was no fever and everything was normal. And then she thought that he had eaten something wrong that morning and had poisoned himself. He quickly backed away from her and said he was fine and didn't understand why she thought he was sick if he had sent her those things. Rupert kept insisting that it wasn't gratitude, but payment. Noelle didn't understand why he kept insisting that it was. Rupert replied that he insisted because the two words had different meanings. Gratitude was an expression of appreciation for help, and payment was repayment of a debt. He just didn't want to owe anyone, much less her. Then she asked him if it made sense, because if he wanted to pay her back, he needed to know what she wanted. Rupert was surprised to hear that, since a couple of weeks ago she had been crazy about such expensive things. So he asked her what she wanted, and Noelle said she wanted him to play ball with Leah, but he said he was busy, and if she needed to buy something, he would be happy to pay for it. So Noelle went back to her room and told the maids to put things away and bring them back. But then she changed her mind and told them to take them to the Marquis's room and spread them out on the bed. In the evening, the Marquis knocked on her door, and she opened the door and asked him why he had come, but he thought she knew why, so Noelle told him to come into the room, and then they would talk. Rupert stood on the threshold and said it would be strange for him to come to her at such a late hour. Then the Marquis said that it was much stranger that she could not enter the room of her own wife, with whom she had once made a child. Rupert said that she had changed a great deal, and it was as if he were talking to another person. Then she realized that he wasn't kidding, and as they walked into the room, she realized that fortunately she had learned to control her anger. She just wanted to talk to Rupert again, but since the day she'd stitched up his wound, it had been difficult to get in touch with him. She also didn't know when he would change his attitude, so the only way she had left was to force him to come. Rupert told her to take all the things she had moved into his room, including those she had scattered on the bed. She had no choice but to piss him off, since he'd decided to avoid seeing her. So she told him she returned them since she didn't need them. Then he asked her to just explain what she needed. Noelle replied that her wish was still the same. It was because he didn't want to get a little closer as well as pay attention to Leah that he ignored her request. She also said that as parents, they had to fulfill at least minimal duties, but she had no other wishes. Rupert asked if she was really doing it for Leah's sake, or if it was some way of getting something from him. She swore that she didn't want anything from him and realized that he was still unsure of her and thought she was faking it. He was surprised and wanted to know what she had besides clothes, and she said she had other things, and then wondered if he was talking about her feelings or the love between the couple. She also couldn't understand why he was asking her that, if he cared. Noelle wondered if he had ever had feelings for her, and then she said out loud that she didn't need anything. She also said that love or affection, they were too deeply entrenched in the relationship to discuss something like that, and she had given up hope of ever regaining his trust. She had just resigned herself to the constant rejections, and she realized that a broken relationship was not easy to rebuild. She thought that maybe in time they could become good friends, but now she had to protect Leah from Rupert. So she said she would have to leave things as they were and just keep the appearance of a couple. After all, it was a marriage of convenience. She was going to change the future, so she and Leah wouldn't die. She also said she wouldn't do anything that would make Rupert angry and would behave with restraint and respect, because even the appearance of a relationship would be easier for Leah to accept than not seeing her parents at all and spending time with them. Suddenly, she saw that there was something wrong with the Marquis, and she thought she had made him angry. But he replied that she had not. Then she asked him to promise her that he would spend time with his daughter. After a little thought, he agreed as if she really wanted him to, He would do his best. That was the first time she heard Rupert say something really nice. No one was born and became a perfect parent in an instant, and spending time with your child made you grow and learn with them. Rupert will be a good father one day. Noelle thought that if he had nothing to be angry about, there would be no point in killing, and if the situation became dangerous, she would just take Leah and run away. All the problems will be solved by the protagonist. The novel is like a fairy tale in which only true love will break the curse. When that happens, she'll be forced to leave him. It'll be a happy ending for everyone. She also noticed that Rupert reacted strangely to her words, but she didn't have to worry about that because she had already gotten what she wanted. It was hard for Marquise to understand him because he was a man who hid a dark past. In any case, the biggest problem was solved. Now, her reputation was lame. At 20, the only person she could call her friend was her relative's brother, with whom they had been in contact since childhood. But he had a terrible temper, just like her heroine, and that was that. Even the memories made her uncomfortable, and she didn't understand how she could have behaved like that in the past. Luckily, the new maids were not as afraid of her as those who had worked here longer, though she still had the worst reputation among the local population. Jenna followed her mistress and timidly asked why there were such terrible rumors about her, but Noelle told herself that they weren't rumors. Noelle didn't trust her relatives, and so she was mad that she had no one to discuss her future with. Time went on, and Leah was getting cuter and cuter. She was playing ball, and when she saw her mom, she called her over to her. Despite her thoughts and worries, Noelle still spent a lot of time with Leah, and she thought it was all for the best. Suddenly, Leah caught up to the ball and kicked it, but it hit the leg of a guy in a uniform, and Noelle didn't know who it was. Judging by the uniform, it was one of Rupert's knights. It also seemed to her that they weren't on the best of terms. She used to value only people with good bloodlines, and therefore despised everyone, including knights who were not of noble descent. Then Leah said that this uncle had picked up the ball for her, and Noelle told her daughter that she should have thanked him for it, but the knight said it was okay and she didn't have to. When Noelle looked at the knight, she thought it was the first time she had ever seen a man who could be called handsome and cool at the same time. The knight bowed and introduced himself, saying his name was Aaron. She asked him if she should call him by his first name, and he replied that there were no family names in his lineage, so she could call him by his first name. Noelle tried to keep her cool since she knew that this knight Aaron was Aisha Wren. The girl who would separate her and Rupert in the future was the protagonist of the novel. The Marquise knew that she was pretending to be a man, but she imagined her very differently. At first glance, she was very beautiful, but if you looked closely, you could see that it was a real Iron Lady. The expression on her face, the gestures in her voice, she was like a knight from an old era. Noelle even thought that Aisha was more like a knight than Rupert. Certainly he was handsome, but his aura was a little frightening, and his character was not a gift either, and he behaved like a bad guy in general was not to Noelle's taste. She thanked Sir Aaron for helping her daughter, but he said it was all right and there was no need for formalities. Leah also wanted to thank him again, but when she took his sleeve, she saw blood and thought he had hurt himself. Then Aaron said it was all right. The Marquise thought he was on his way to the healer, so she apologized for delaying him. Aaron said they shouldn't have worried as it was just a scratch, and the healer wasn't there, so he was just coming from him. Then the Marquise wondered where he had gone. Then Aaron said that there had been a lot of monsters on the border lately, and there were more wounded. But if all the healers would help there, it would be a madhouse. Noelle thought about the fact that when Leah got the burn, the healer had come, or rather his apprentice, and wondered if there was a problem with staffing here as in her previous life. Leah yanked her mother and said that the knight could rely on her because her mother healed, so that one could not even feel her touch. But Aaron couldn't afford to ask such a thing of the Marquess. But after Noelle looked at her daughter, she realized she couldn't refuse. She invited Aaron to follow him and asked him not to worry as she knew the basics of medicine. Aaron was obviously worried about being treated by the evil Marquise, but the only thing Noelle could do was to show what she could do and cure Aisha. Meanwhile, they arrived at the healer's office. Then the Marquise found bandages and the right medicine in a cabinet. Aaron said he could do it himself, but Noelle said it would be better for the patient to keep quiet. She looked in another cabinet and was surprised that there was so much there. So far, she had lived the life of a socialite and knew little about medicine in this world, and she was at least familiar with antipyretics. However, if possible, she decided that she would have to learn the local medicine. Aaron had already taken off his jacket and sat down to wait, and Leah wanted to wait to see how her mother would treat the wound. Noelle had warned the little girl that if there was blood she might get scared, but she promised she wouldn't, and she wanted to see how she would treat it. When the Marquise took Aaron's hand, luckily the wound wasn't that deep so they could do without stitches. She said the wound wasn't fatal, but he didn't even treat it. He confirmed as it was just a scratch. Noelle said his main job was to take care of his body. Aaron thought she was angry, but she said she wasn't angry. She explained that she wasn't judging him, she was just concerned. Then she finally finished. Then Aaron thanked her for her help. Then Aaron said that if she needed help, she could go to him, and he knew it wasn't enough. But he wanted to thank her, but Noelle had enough of him. Suddenly, Noelle appeared in the middle of the street where the houses were crumbling. She realized she was in a conscious dream and came to some house. She didn't understand why she had come here. She didn't understand what sounds were coming from the second floor. There was some strange smoke around her, and as she walked to the second floor, the voice got louder, and she began to recognize it. When she got to the second floor, she saw little Leah crying with a toy in her hands. She ran up to her daughter but couldn't touch her. She was like a ghost and didn't understand why she couldn't touch her. Then she tried to just calm her down, saying that her mom was there for her. She didn't understand why she was having this dream at all, and realized she had to wake up somehow. Noelle looked up at the ceiling where the dust was falling, and then the beams supporting the ceiling started to crack, and she told her daughter that she shouldn't be here. Then the beam cracked, and rocks started falling from the ceiling, and Noelle covered her daughter, and all the rocks fell on them. And when they were covered with rocks, she woke up in her bed in a cold sweat. She realized it was just a nightmare. She wanted to go and check on Leah, but she was definitely still asleep, and she didn't want to wake her up. Going to the window, she thought that everything in the dream was so real that she was even now nervous. A couple hours later, her daughter came running down the hallway. She decided to ask how her daughter had slept and if she had any pain. Leah replied that everything was fine and decided to ask how her mom slept. Then Noelle remembered the collapse in that house from her dream and decided to lie that she had slept well too. Noelle picked her daughter up in her arms and they went to eat, but on the way, they met Rupert in the hallway. Noelle asked why he was here, and then she exhaled heavily, saying that he had come to keep his promise. Then the Marquise told her daughter that her father would be having breakfast with them as well. Noelle lowered her daughter to the floor and told her to greet him properly. Then Leah curtsied and greeted the Marquis. Then Noelle asked her daughter why she didn't call him Daddy, but Leah wasn't sure if she was allowed to call him that. Then Rupert himself said that she was certainly allowed to call him that. Noelle decided to ask her daughter why she thought that Daddy should be called Marquis, and Leah said that every time she saw him, she called him that. And how could she say Daddy to an uncle she hardly ever saw? She also said that they were not close, and that she had to show her respect, because that was what she had been taught in etiquette class. Noelle pressed her lip and realized that they were to blame for that. Children are sensitive to their parents' emotions, and until recently, Leah had only felt that she and Rupert were strangers to each other. Then she asked her husband's opinion, as she felt that he too should have been ashamed. Then he sat down with his daughter, but he was confused and didn't know what to say. So Noelle told him to say what he felt. Then he stroked his daughter's head and told her that she didn't have to call him Marquis, and she could call him Daddy. He said there was no way he was going to be mad. Noelle couldn't believe Rupert was capable of something like that. But suddenly, Leah asked what it was about Mom if she would call him Marquis the same way. Then Rupert nodded and said that Noelle would no longer call him Marquis and that she could call him by his first name. Rupert was never close to anyone and was always ready to kill, but could she really call him by his name? She no longer hoped this day would come. The Marquis even took his daughter in his arms, and he certainly couldn't resist his sweet daughter, and the Marquise even thought that maybe they would get along someday. Now that they had it all figured out, the Marquis called them in for breakfast, and his wife marveled at the way he held their daughter in his arms. One fine afternoon, he and Leah spent time reading the newspaper. Leah loved the way her mom would read to her what was in the paper. Not only did she like to draw or play ball, but sometimes she was fascinated by such ordinary things. At one point, a flyer fell out of the paper with an invitation to a festival, and the maid apologized because the flyer must have fallen into the paper by accident. Leah suggested that her mother go to the festival. Noelle thought that her daughter hadn't seen the whole estate, and it would be a good chance for her to look around too. Then she said that there would be a lot of people there, so she had to obey her. So Leah promised to obey her. When the Marquise and her daughter were going to the festival, they saw Sir Aaron, and the Marquise asked him what he was doing here, and he said that he had been ordered to accompany them. Noelle asked if the knights were not supposed to be doing more important things like killing monsters, as she didn't think they would be assigned to such nonsense as escorting them. Aaron thought that perhaps the Lord was just taking care of his wife, so he assigned them to escort them. But Noelle thought that could not be the case, and he must have been worried, or not, he just wanted to follow her. Aaron also added that there had been sightings of gargoyles in the area recently, so there was nothing wrong with being more vigilant. Noelle knew that gargoyles were monsters created with the help of black mages. The Marquise was worried that they had infiltrated the city, but the knight said they had been discovered in the suburbs. Aaron was sure it was definitely a trick of some third-level black mages, but they hadn't found anyone yet, but it was only a matter of time. Noelle imagined they'd had enough of them by now. Then they got into the carriage, and after a while, they arrived at the festival. Leah knew right away where she wanted to go, and Noelle didn't mind, but asked her daughter to hold her hand tightly and not let go. It seemed to Aaron that Lady Leah liked it here, as it was her first time out of the manor, and there were many foreigners here, probably because of the festival. The Anal family was making connections, and this attracted many merchants and tourists from other countries and empires. The Marquise noticed that he was well aware of the business, and thought that maybe he knew something about the healers and the shortage of men. She also decided to ask how the common people were treated. Aaron replied that the common people bought medicinal potions from the stores if the illness was not serious. Then she asked the knight where the healers were trained, if they were trained in a particular place. Aaron replied that there were no specialized schools, but each master took apprentices. She was sure they only had the strength to teach a certain number of people and assumed there would be an epidemic. The knight said he hadn't been here long, but knew there had never been a serious mass disease. Noelle thought it was funny that she was the Marquis' wife, and asked one of their knights about affairs in the area. Aaron thought that knowing all about the lives of the commoners was rather uncomplicated. Aaron did notice that the lady was interested in medicine. Then he told her that there was a real shortage of healers, and it would be nice if her interest would make a difference. Then the Marquise was surprised by his words. She also noticed that he was trying so hard not to hurt the feelings of the others that they rarely crossed paths. But with each meeting, she liked him more and more. She even felt sorry that Aaron, that is Aisha, would go to Rupert. He also said that if the lady asked the Marquis herself, she would get a more detailed answer, and that it would be nice if they came here together. But Noelle didn't even think about that. She thought that was hardly possible since she annoyed him. Aaron had said that as soon as the lady said she was going for a walk, he had instructed him to keep an eye on her and Lady Leah. Noelle realized that Rupert had sent him to keep an eye on her after all. Then she said it was the first time she had heard of it, and the knight said he was just worried about his wife. Noelle told Sir Aaron that he had a beautiful smile and that it was the first time he had smiled. Suddenly the Marquis came up to them and said that he had ordered Aaron to accompany them, and they were standing here in the middle of the street flirting. He hoped he wasn't disturbing them and saw his wife having a good time. The commander of the knights told Rupert that they had captured 3 black mages and they were trying to hide within the walls of the city. But Rupert did not listen to him and thought only of Noelle Anal. She had become so calm and studious and had stopped insisting on getting closer as soon as he had asked her to keep her distance. She had obeyed and agreed. He didn't know what he wanted from her. He had gotten what he wanted from her, and now he was angry. Then the commander pulled him out of his thoughts and said that the Lord did not listen to him at all, and it was very rare. Then the commander asked if he was tired. Rupert replied that he was fine and asked what they were talking about. The commander said that they were talking about the 4 women who had been kidnapped by the detainees and that all the women were unharmed. The commander also said that it was all thanks to Rupert, as they thought the mages would just run away, but he ordered them to find them at any cost, and they eventually found the mages' lair and rescued those women. Rupert only asked if they had found the gargoyles. The commander replied that they hadn't found them yet, but once the mages were captured, they would find the monsters quickly. Rupert agreed and said that if the mage did not control the gargoyle, it would become an ordinary statue. He also told Bert to return the victims to their families as soon as possible. But the commander was in no hurry to leave, And then Rupert thought he had more to say, and Bert asked if he wanted to join his family. Rupert asked who he needed to join, and the commander said that the Marquis and the young lady had gone to the fair, and he should go too, and he said he would take care of the rest and finish the job here. Rupert remembered that he had sent Sir Aaron with them, but the commander said he should spend time with his wife and daughter sometimes. So Rupert turned around and left and told him to forget it, as he had to get home and had a lot to do. The commander shouted in his wake that there was nothing in the world better than being with his family. After a while, the Marquis thought that the commander was getting old, and that's why he was talking nonsense. But eventually, he wandered into the square where the fair was being held, and didn't realize what he was doing here until he heard his wife complimenting Sir Aaron. He wasn't sure then, but through the crowd he saw Noelle and realized it would be her voice. As he approached them, he couldn't understand why the hell she was so happy and smiling, and he could see that she was having a very good time. Then Noelle asked why he had come, and Rupert said he was just passing by. But she couldn't believe he was walking alone, and Rupert said that all the knights were busy, and Aaron was starting to feel like a third wheel. Noelle couldn't understand how they could let him go alone, but if she asked him about it, he'd freak out. So she just told him to be careful on the way home. Then Aaron decided to say that he would go and help the squad, and it would be a good opportunity for them to spend time together. The Marquise asked if he had to go, and he apologized to her and said he had to go back and help the others. Then the Marquise thought that he was uncomfortable that the whole squad was working and she was just accompanying them. There was nothing to be done, and told her daughter to say goodbye to Sir Aaron. Leah asked if they could go for a walk together, and Aaron promised that they would. Leah also asked them to seal their promise with their fingers, and Aaron agreed, but the Marquis was very unhappy that they had not said goodbye. Rupert was boiling more and more and couldn't understand what this new feeling was. When Noelle stayed with her daughter and her husband, she asked him if people shouldn't pay attention to him since he was the ruler of the town. Then he said that no one cared what he looked like. Then the people around him began to whisper that Rupert looked like their lord, and some thought it was the Marquis of Anal himself, for there could not be two men so alike in the kingdom. Noelle didn't like to be the center of attention, and so she put on her hood and asked him why he had decided to join them so suddenly. Then the Marquis said that he had joined them because he had made her a promise. She had asked him to spend more time with Leah, but she was here too, not just their daughter. Noelle also said that they used to say that if a man changed, it meant he was dead. And then she asked him if his wound had healed, as if nothing had happened. He could not understand how one could treat a healthy person as if he were sick. Then he angrily asked her to take off his clothes so that she could see for herself if she wanted to check the wound. Then he sat down to his daughter and said that she must have liked Sir Aaron, and she nodded, saying he was so cool, and Noelle added that he was a pretty nice guy. Rupert looked at his wife sternly and asked her what was wrong with him. She had always been as rough as a wild animal, and next to him she was suddenly an innocent sheep. Noelle couldn't believe that he had decided to insult her, but Rupert asked his daughter why she liked Sir Aaron. Then Leah happily replied that he was kind and promised to win a toy for her. But suddenly, Leah was upset because Sir Aaron had left, and that meant she wouldn't have the toy, and her mother told her not to worry because she would sort it out. But suddenly, Rupert said he would win her the toy, and picked her up in his arms, and said she would see that Daddy was much better than Sir Aaron. Noelle didn't know why he had a competitive instinct, but looking at them, she realized that Rupert could be a good father after all. When they were alone, they came to an amusement shed where a man suggested they play darts and win a prize depending on where the dart hit. Noelle asked her daughter what she would like to win, but Leah didn't even have time to say what she would like to win, as Rupert had already taken the dart and confidently said that he didn't have to choose as he would win everything. After the first throw, Rupert hit the center of the target, and then the prize of a bear was handed to him. Noelle looked at her husband and knew it was all because of the curse, but his physical strength was truly astounding. Then Noelle saw her husband get down on one knee and hand her daughter the bear he had won. Leah was very happy with her father's gift and couldn't get enough of it. After he saw the sincere joy of his daughter, he warmed up a little and decided to win the next toy, namely a kitten. But the girl managed to stop her father and said that she had enough of the bear as it was the first thing he gave her. Then Noelle remembered that it was the first time Rupert had ever given something to his daughter, and that alone made her happy. The man didn't even know that his daughter liked bears and had thought of catching one on the next hunt for her. But Noelle didn't think it was a good idea but she liked the way they looked together and wished they could continue to have that kind of relationship in the future. Suddenly, she remembered her terrible dream where Leah was sitting in a bear hug and crying, but she decided to let it go as it was just a dream, and now everything was different. Then she took her daughter's hand and suggested that she go and see something else. She also thought that since Rupert was with them, nothing bad could happen. Suddenly, a man and a woman approached them. The man apologized for his tactlessness, and they just wanted to thank Rupert for saving their daughter. Then Rupert realized that they were the parents of one of the kidnapped girls. The man thanked him again for finding their daughter and bringing her home. Now, Noelle realized what her husband and the knights had really been doing all this time. Suddenly, the little girl asked her mom who these people were, and she said that her daddy had done a good deed for them and they had come to thank him. Then Rupert said that he was only doing his duty, but the woman said that even though he had saved their daughter, she wanted to thank him. And then the woman called the saved daughter Pell. She came up and her mother told her that she could thank the gentleman. When Noelle saw the girl, she trembled because she was strange and uncomfortable. Leah noticed this and asked what was wrong with her, and then her mother jerked her hand away and smilingly said it was all right. Just as she was reassuring her daughter that she was fine, there was an explosion behind her. Suddenly, Pell felt sick, and then a huge gargoyle burst out of her back like a suit. As Rupert covered his wife and child with himself, Noelle allowed herself a glance at her daughter, but found that she was not there. At that moment, Rupert ran after the gargoyle, but he couldn't catch up with it, and it flew away, and he realized that it was going to attack another place. He thought he had rescued the kidnapped girl, but apparently the mages were experimenting on her. There were 4 hostages in total, and he couldn't imagine that all 4 would turn into gargoyles. As he thought about it, the man didn't even realize he was wounded. He wouldn't be able to dodge as it wasn't easy when there were those to protect. Then he told his wife and daughter to hide quickly. When he turned to them, Noelle told him that she had lost her daughter and she had asked her not to let go of his hand. Then he told her to find a safe place to hide, but she objected and said that she had to find her daughter. But Rupert thought it would be better for someone to be safe than for the 2 of them to put themselves at risk. Noelle couldn't just leave her and realized that she had to find Leah. He knew Noelle wouldn't leave until they found Leah, so he told her to rely on him. She couldn't believe his words, and then he said she had better take care of herself and find shelter. But after a second, she angrily told him not to lie to her. She was far from stupid, and she realized that he would protect his estate first and not the child. He was probably thinking now that it was a waste of time to look for the child without having the slightest idea where he was. He had nothing to say, and Noelle also said she understood his position as ruler, but a father who would risk the life and health of his child was the worst person in the world. He wanted to reach out to her and comfort her, but she slapped him on the arm and threw it away, telling him not to touch her, and she was going to find Leah herself. Then she turned and went the other way to look for her daughter, and Rupert was going to follow her and stop her, for he did not understand how she was going to do it in such chaos. He heard the cries for help behind him and couldn't tear himself away from going after his wife and going to help the one who was begging for her. He glimpsed a glimpse of his daughter's delight at his gift, but he made a decision not to think about it because he didn't want to worry about anyone and he didn't want to love anyone either. He couldn't let a single feeling creep into his heart. His mother wanted him to be the worst person ever, but he didn't want to go that way. He wanted to be someone people would honor and respect, and he was going to save as many lives as possible. He was going to do things differently, no matter what it cost him. His knights didn't know what to do anymore, and he gave the order that first they were to take the wounded to safety. Meanwhile, Noelle kept running down the street calling for her daughter, and so she got to the place she had seen in the nightmare. Then she started to think that the dream was a dream, but then it meant that if it became reality, she would die with her daughter. Then one of Hillis's knights from the Black Crows ran up to her and said he had come on orders. That's when he raised his gun at the Nemo and shot green smoke. Hillis also said he had to escort her to safety and grabbed her arm, but Noelle begged him to stop because she had to find her daughter. She also said that in such a dangerous situation, she had to look for the Marquis's daughter first, so she ordered him to let her go, but Hillis couldn't let her go. Noelle wanted him to tell everyone that even if something happened to her, the knights would not be responsible for it. But the knight stopped her, not because of fear of punishment, but because it was very dangerous there. Suddenly, they heard one of the knights hit a gargoyle, and as it fell, it hit the roof of one of the houses near them, and because of that, the stones started to fall. And at that moment, one big boulder fell on the marquise, and Hillis rushed to save her. Then he rushed to her and pushed her away, but eventually a huge rock fell on his leg and broke it. The marquise ran up to the knight and asked him not to move, and took a large bar that was lying nearby and used it as a lever to remove the boulder from the knight's leg. After a few minutes of her efforts, Hillis was free from the trap. Hillis thanked her for saving him, but she asked him not to do it because he was hurt because of her. Then she turned around, and the knight realized that she was still going to go in there. She said with a smile that it was her fault that he had a fracture, so she apologized for going to leave him alone. A few minutes ago at the same time, Marquis and the knight saw green smoke in the sky. Then he realized that they had found Noelle, but not Leah, or they would have emitted yellow smoke. Rupert told the knights to split into 2 groups and move out, and he and Aaron would lead them. But first they had to go to the center of the city. But Commander Burt came up to him and told him to go where the signal had been sent from. Rupert thought it would be better for him to go to the center because he knew how to fight the gargoyles. So he agreed and decided to rely on them and ran towards the green flash. But as they ran, there were more flashes, and Rupert realized that something was going on there and they had to hurry. After a couple of minutes, they reached the right street and saw Sir Hillis. He warned the Marquis that the gargoyle was there and with his wife. Then he asked where she had gone, and the knight pointed to an old and decrepit house that was about to collapse. When he ran up to it and realized she was headed for certain death, the knights tried to talk him out of it as the supports might not hold, and then Sir Aaron, struggling with his conscience, told the Marquis that he should have acted more wisely and he could not let them both die. Then the Marquis quickly agreed with him. Meanwhile, Leah sat on the 2nd floor of the house and holding the bear sat crying. She thought it was her punishment for misbehaving. After all, she had dropped the bear in the square out of fright and let go of her mother's hand and ran after it. But the crowds carried the bear farther and farther away. She couldn't leave it behind as it was her first present from her daddy. She managed to run and catch the bear, but then she realized she was lost and was all alone in the crowd. Leah tried not to cry because she knew that if she did, her mom would leave her. So she decided to just wait quietly. But finally, she heard her mom's long-awaited voice and she came running after Leah. Noelle rushed to her daughter and hugged her. She asked her daughter to ask her, for she must have been very scared. Noelle picked her up in her arms because they had to get out, but Leah didn't understand where they were going because there were monsters outside. Marquise told her that she would be there for her now and everything would be all right. She ran up the stairs with her daughter. She knew they had to get out of there as soon as possible, but the beams were already starting to crack and the ceiling was starting to collapse. Marquise knew she wouldn't be able to run out, and so she wanted to protect at least her daughter. The moment she closed her eyes and covered Leah with herself, the rock stopped falling and hovered in the air. Then she decided to take advantage of the moment and run to the exit, but the stones started falling again, and she had one more step to go before she could get out of the house. But she didn't have time. Then, with one last spurt, she thought she would get out and held out her hand in the hope that she would, but she didn't have time. And at the last moment, Rupert pulled her hand and they fell to the ground together. In the afternoon, Noelle was in bed with a fever and her body felt like lead. She heard her husband asking the doctor why the fever had not gone down. The doctor at first thought that the lady was overworked, but after observing her, he came to the conclusion that the Marquise's symptoms were more like exhaustion, like those of saints or magicians. Rupert had noticed that it only happened when someone was forcibly releasing magical or divine power, and Noelle was not a magician. It seemed strange to the doctor, too. But there was nothing they could do now, and they could only hope that the antipyretics would help. Noelle mumbled quietly that she didn't feel as bad as they thought she did, but she was only worried about her daughter. Then Rupert tasted her forehead and realized she was on fire. She felt his touch and asked what was wrong with her daughter, and he said that she was fine and she could meet her when she felt better. This was a relief to Noelle, and so she wanted to get back on her feet and see the baby girl sooner. The next day, the Marquise woke up and felt like a cucumber, as if she hadn't been sick at all. There was a knock on the door, and when she let it in, it was Leah. As soon as she entered the room, she cried, and the Marquise ran to her daughter to calm her down. The Marquise thought that her daughter was sick, or that she was angry with her, or that someone had hurt her. Leah choked back her tears and asked for forgiveness because she thought she was to blame, but Noelle told her it wasn't her fault. Leah continued to cry and said that she would not cry anymore and would not ask to go to the festival, and that she would always obey her mother and that she would be the most obedient child in the world. She only wished that her mother would not leave her. Marquise couldn't understand what she was talking about because she wasn't going to leave her and wanted to know where she got such thoughts from. Leah then answered that she just knew that she and Daddy didn't love her. She knew that she annoyed her parents and that they didn't want her to be born at all. Leah promised that she wouldn't cry anymore and that she would become the most obedient and the best daughter, and asked her mom not to leave her. After a while, Leah fell asleep beside her mother. Noelle realized that she was the worst mother in the world. Leah's psychological trauma was much deeper than she realized. Whenever something bad happened, she blamed herself and thought she could be abandoned at any moment. Noelle got out of bed and looked at her daughter, not sure what to do, and thoughtfully left the room and walked down the hall to Rupert's office and entered without knocking. The Marquis was slightly annoyed that she was now barging in on him without knocking, but Noelle knew that if he realized it was her, he wouldn't allow her in, and he nodded that he would. Rupert decided to ask what she had come for, and Noelle asked if he had been to see Leah since the incident. Then he replied that he had checked on her once, and Noelle was furious, as the whole time she had been ill, their daughter had been tormented by guilt. She thought that if he had cared a little, this wouldn't have happened, but he was busy as usual and said he had a lot to do. Noelle thought he should be ashamed, and she thought that at least he had begun to appreciate his child a little. Then Rupert got up from his seat and came over to her and said that she was wrong because he had only kept his promise to her. At that moment, the girl realized that it wasn't real. Rupert also said that that's why he should be credited with something he never did. Then Noelle was disappointed in him. He saw her disappointment, and only he wanted to touch her when he immediately changed his mind and turned around and said he wanted to end it. She believed that if she worked hard at it, they would make good parents. Then she reminded him that he had saved them when the building was collapsing, and if Leah really meant nothing to him, then why had he done it? After her words, he turned around and called her a fool and asked her how long she would be fooling herself with illusions, because what would have happened to his reputation if he hadn't saved his own child and wife? Rupert had no other reason to pull such useless and weak people out of the clutches of death. Then she was really ready to give up, and disappointed she told Rupert Anal that he was the worst man in the world. Already in the morning, Sir Hillis was sitting off to the side watching the training of the knights, as suddenly the Marquis came to him. Then she stood up and asked what brought her here, and Noelle said that he had broken his leg through her fault, so she was just obliged to check on him. Hillis said confidently that he was fine, but he was a little bored sitting around when the others were practicing. To Noelle, those words sounded like a relief. The knight was just doing his duty and she shouldn't have come, but the Marquis reminded her that he had risked his life to save her. Then she bowed to the knight saying it was worth it, and she couldn't keep quiet about such a thing, and thanked him for saving her and asked for forgiveness for his injury. Hillis got embarrassed and said that was enough and asked the Marquis not to apologize, and now he understood how she felt then and how desperate she was. The knight was glad that Lady Leah was safe, and so was he. Suddenly, someone called out to the Marquise it was Sir Aaron. Noelle asked what happened that Sir Aaron was running so fast and couldn't catch his breath. Sir Aaron said that as soon as he heard that the Marquise had come to his senses, and he was worried if she was all right. The Marquise thanked Sir Aaron for his concern, but Sir Aaron thought there was nothing to thank him for. Then the Marquise thought that perhaps he was not well, for he had turned pale, and it must have meant that something had happened. Then Aaron said he had to apologize to the Marquise. The Marquise didn't think he had done anything wrong, and then Aaron said that when she ran to save Lady Leah in the building that was about to collapse, Mr. Rupert wanted to go after her. But Aaron talked him out of it, even though he knew that the Marquise's life was in danger. He didn't realize then that the young lady's life was also in danger. Then Hillis asked Aaron not to hurry, for what kind of confession he was making. Sir Aaron also ignored the fact that she and her daughter were on the brink of death. Knights didn't behave like that, especially since she was so kind to the Marquis. Noelle marveled that he had apologized for putting Rupert's life before hers and Leah's. The Marquis said he shouldn't have apologized, as she understood, and the Marquis was more important to them, so his life was their priority. For example, if Lady Leah and another child fell into the water, of course she would rush to save her daughter. That was why she asked him not to apologize, and she didn't think everyone had done anything wrong. The Marquise was even glad to hear all this. Without true love, there would be no way to lift the curse from him, and Noelle had high hopes for Aisha. Aron thanked the Marquise for these words, and was very grateful, and said that if the lady needed help, she should only say so. The Marquise accepted his help, but also told him that she would be leaving Anal Manor soon. Aron thought she was going somewhere, and the Marquise said that Leah was very frightened, so she should rest, and the Marquis had a second estate somewhere in the kingdom of Durin where they would go. Noelle thought that for Leah, every corner of the place was filled with bad memories, and if they changed the environment, she would feel better. Sir Hillis thought it was a good idea for the Marquis and her daughter to go on vacation, and surely at least one of them was angry with the Marquis. Then Noelle praised him for his powers of observation and said she wanted to go away with him. Then Sir Hillis thought it couldn't be so and thought she would be burdened by such a decision. And besides, the gentleman was always so straightforward and thought he would take it as an insult. The Marquise wasn't sure that would happen even though they'd be gone for a long time. It's not a lie because she didn't think it would end like this. Then she asked Sir Aron to look after Rupert. She finally realized she couldn't change her husband and hoped he would find happiness with Aisha. Noelle didn't have a relationship with Rupert, but she didn't want to deprive Leah of her father, so her goal was not to break the curse, but to get a divorce and live her own life. The day of the trip came, and Noelle and her daughter were in the carriage, and she wanted to ask her mother where they were going, and the Marquis said they were going on vacation. They were going to another family estate that was in the kingdom of Durin, and so they would be farthest from their home and Rupert. Noelle turned to her daughter and said that they would now be together for days on end. Leah thought she had things to do, but her mom told her that she was now completely free, so if she wanted to go somewhere, she only had to say the word. Then Leah hugged her mom, showing how happy she was, and Marquise was glad she had her. Noelle couldn't imagine how she would have lived without Leah around, because since her memories of her past life had come back to her, she couldn't bear to be alone. This little girl was very precious to her, and she wanted to make her the happiest she could be. Rupert stood watching the training of the knights, but he felt the two Aron and Hillis looking at him and said that if they had anything to say, they had better start talking. And Sir Hillis, coughing, said that if he could heed their advice. But Rupert interrupted him and said that he would listen to them first and then decide what to do. Then Hillis asked if the Marquis knew when the lady would return. The Marquis was surprised at this answer and asked why he cared about the date of his wife's return. Then Hillis timidly said that he was afraid that their relationship was over. At the same moment, the Marquis turned away and said wryly that he had never had a relationship with her. But Hillis did not understand what he meant, and then the Marquis wondered why he cared at all. Then Hillis couldn't stand it and asked if there was nothing between them then why he took everything in a flip when it came to the mistress. At that moment, Sir Laurent covered Sir Hillis's mouth with his hands and asked the gentleman to forgive him, for it seemed to him that Hillis had not only hurt his leg, but also his head. After this performance, Rupert could not understand when Noelle had become so close to the knights, and he would probably never be able to understand this woman. Suddenly, from behind him, the commander of the knights suggested that the Marquis send a bouquet to his lady, and Rupert was annoyed that everyone was very chatty today. So he told the commander that he was off on business and he could do as he pleased. Entering his office for a moment, Rupert remembered the words his wife had said about him being a terrible man. It had been several days since Noelle and Leah had left the estate. Noelle sat staring out the window, wondering what she should do, and then decided she should have prepared for a divorce. She also began to think about whether she should try to divide the property or start saving for her own, or whether she should start doing the paperwork right away. She also wondered what to do with the treasure they had found through her investments and whether she should get a job. Then she worried that Rupert might insist on custody of Leah. Suddenly, her musings were interrupted by her daughter running towards her with a drawing. The Marquise turned around and asked her daughter not to run so fast because she could fall and hurt herself. Then Leah handed her a piece of paper and pointed out that she had drawn her mother on it. Noelle said it was a beauty and praised her daughter for her excellent drawing, She saw how beautiful she was in her daughter's eyes. Noelle told the maid emphatically that she would like to frame the picture and show it to everyone, and the maid said she would have the frame ready immediately. Life in the villa was not so bad, and although the maids were few, they did their jobs well. Noelle saw how much everyone loved Leah, and that was the most important thing for her. These maids made Leah feel comfortable, unlike how it was at home. Leah ran up to her mom and asked her to go get the cake, but the maid said she could do it instead of mistress, but the young lady said she only wanted to go with her mom. As soon as they got here, the Marquise noticed how much Leah liked to walk with her. After that incident, she was afraid that her daughter would be withdrawn, but she was glad that everything was all right. Then, Noelle and her daughter got into a carriage and drove to the bakery. They got out, and the coachman said he would wait for them by the carriage. Then the Marquise said they were just going for a walk. As they walked to the fountain and soon came to a bridge from which they watched the river flow, Noelle thought that everything about the place was peaceful. Suddenly, they heard a strange noise, and Leah asked her mother to look somewhere, but Noelle said it could be dangerous. Leah insisted that it could be that someone was hurt, and that person would need help. Noelle gave in to her daughter's persuasion, but said that if they were in danger, they would run away, and Leah promised that she would run as fast as possible. The two girls pleaded with Mrs. Rise to wake up. Leah saw someone lying in the middle of the crowd. It was said that the woman had fallen from the boat straight into the water. Noelle was horrified and realized she would have to do CPR. So she turned and told her daughter not to run away like last time and to stay close by, and her daughter promised she would be there like Velcro. Marquise started to go through the crowd and asked to be let through, and when she got in front of the victim, she asked if the woman had heard her and asked how she was feeling. But there was no answer to either question. Then she removed the tight clothing from her ribcage, crossed both palms one over the other, and placed her hands in a lock on her ribcage right in the center. She knew his pulse was normal, unlike his breathing. And that's when she started resuscitation and CPR. Everyone present could not understand what she was doing, but after a couple of minutes, the woman coughed and regained consciousness, and then the Marquise told her not to move too sharply because it was dangerous. One of the girls came closer, and Noelle said that the lady needed to be warmed and asked the girl to lend her a shawl. But the girl didn't understand who she was to order her around. Then Noelle repeated that she could lend the shawl to the lady who was shivering with cold, for she had asked the lady, though she did not know her name. At last, the girl gave her the shawl and threw it over the woman and said that she was now safe and well. The woman was shocked and pleasantly surprised that this girl had saved her. The other two girls who had accompanied the injured woman ran up to her, pushing Noelle away and angrily asking her if she knew who she even was and how dare she touch her. The girls said how the mistress had frightened them and they were very worried about her. The woman asked her companions to step back a bit, and then she approached Noelle and wanted to thank her for saving her, and she thought the girl was a healer. The Marquise said she wasn't a healer at all. Then the woman introduced herself, and her name was Reese Ernst, and she wanted to know the name of her savior. When the Marquise heard her surname, she thought it sounded familiar. She thought that she shouldn't reveal her identity, and if she said that she was a Marquise from another country, it would cause a fuss, and it could prevent her from spending time with Leah, and also those girls were looking at her in a funny way. So she bowed to her mistress and simply introduced herself by name. Rise thought that judging by her manners she was from a noble family, but she hid her origin. But in any case, she wanted to repay her savior. Noelle was embarrassed and said that seeing that she was all right was her greatest reward. Rise was also embarrassed because she was so young and wise, so she thanked her for her kind words. Reese also said that her family was famous for always thanking people for their help, even if they did it late, like now. Noelle decided to tell her her address where she was staying, and Reese thanked her and said she would be sure to stop by. The Marquise took her daughter's hand and started to walk away from the place where they had met Reese, and thought she would just send a gift as a token of her appreciation. She thought that now, in Leah's eyes, she was some sort of superhero. Also, she should have grown up and stopped being shy. She turned to her daughter and said that despite the fact that they were delayed now, they would go straight for the cake. Then the girl was very happy that she jumped. The next day, a guy came to the Marquise to thank her for saving his mother. The guy said that she actually wanted to visit her in person, but she had a fever. At this point, Noelle thought she started to remember something about the Ernst family. The guy introduced himself. His name was Leandro Ernst. He was a young bachelor duke and the most envied groom of the Urin Kingdom. Noelle said then that she was mutually pleased to meet the duke. She thought that was probably the reason why those girls were hovering around his mother. Leandro was a minor character in this affair and also competed with Rupert, although they were complete opposites. They often had to run into each other at official functions. So, knowing Rupert in that light, Leandro would react in the obvious way. Noelle thought that if she revealed that Rupert was her husband, it might make him angry, so she had to be careful. Just as she was about to think of something to say about her husband, Leah appeared from behind her dress and said that Papa was out. Leandro bowed and apologized, as it was disrespectful to speak about it in front of her daughter. Then the Marquise started to say that he had misunderstood, and understood that there was obviously a misunderstanding. Then she said that she did not have a husband because of her little daughter. The appearance of a man in their house was a bit unusual, and in general she asked to forgive her rudeness. At the same moment, the Duke turned to the Marquise and said that if she ever needed anything, she could go to their family, and so they could repay her for her help, and his mother would be glad. After that, he said goodbye to the Marquise and her daughter. Noelle thought he was a young and well-bred man, and for some reason she was immediately reminded of Aaron. Behind them, a servant girl looked out and said with admiration that it was the first time she had seen Duke Ernst so close. Even so, Noelle had no interest in Leandro, and she had no desire to get involved with him. Besides, Leah was Leah's first priority right now, and her interests could wait. Leah could see that her mother was thinking about it and thought that the Duke might be able to help her. Noelle realized that her daughter was very clever and observant, and said that it was not like that at all, and didn't understand why she would even think that, because now it was enough for her to be with her daughter. Now she was determined to do everything for Leah, and she was going to put her own desires on the back burner. Suddenly, Noelle was walking across the room with a pillow and decided to toss it up and ordered it to freeze, and to her surprise, it did. But it only froze for a split second and fell to the floor. And then she realized that she just thought she had some hidden power, but it turned out to be nothing like that. Ever since she suddenly remembered her past life, she had more and more questions. Most of all, she was curious to know what sinister thing had been controlling her mind until the memories came back. The whole problem was that she didn't even have a clue. Nothing strange had ever happened to her before she turned 26, and the only person who knew anything about her, she wondered if she should have contacted. The next morning, Noelle was walking with her daughter again, and they were walking past a clearing where Leah's peers were walking. Leah marveled at their games, and how much fun they were having, and how they were having a good time with each other. And then Noelle realized that her daughter had never played with her peers. Noelle asked if she would like to go and play with them, but Leah lowered her head in embarrassment and said she didn't want to. Noelle thought it would be fun for her to play with them, but her daughter said she was fine as she was. So Noelle sat down with her daughter and said that if she wanted to, she could go to them because there was nothing wrong with it. Leah couldn't believe that she was really allowed, and Noelle added that she could go and meet the other children and play together, and she could wait here. Then Leah happily ran to the other children and said she wouldn't be long, but her mom said she could take her time. Noelle sat down on the bench against that lawn and saw her daughter walk up to the kids and quickly made conversation, and everything seemed to be going well. And then she saw how the kids accepted her into their game and was surprised at how quickly she got along with them. Noelle decided to look around and saw something strange on the side of the park that looked suspiciously crowded, and she wondered what was going on there. At that moment, a woman heard her question and said it was the infirmary she sponsored. It was Lady Ernst. She asked to be called simply Rise, and she was very grateful to her, for she was quickly back on her feet. After a while, they were both sitting on the bench watching the children walk, and Noelle wondered how it was that she was now sitting next to the Duchess. Noelle was very happy that Leah had finally made friends and was having fun, and now in small steps she was moving towards independence from her mother, and that was commendable, but she was getting sad for some reason. Suddenly, the Duchess said that she had heard that when her son came to visit her, he was not polite. Then she said it was fine and nothing like that had happened. But Reese thought it was a great disrespect to the widow. Noelle felt very ashamed and thought that at this rate she would soon really bury Rupert. Then she told her mistress that there had been a misunderstanding and her husband was simply not at home, and then the Duchess apologized for blabbing too much. Reese also said that years ago she had rubbed her husband the wrong way, and mistaken her for a sister in distress. Noelle thought she'd had a hard time with it. The Duchess said the hardest part was the people who stuck to her like leeches. Noelle thought it was hard to go through that alone, and Reese confirmed that. Then Noelle asked if she would like to give her some advice for the future, since she might be in a similar situation. The Duchess thought she was just at the height of her powers, but said it was a little strange because she felt as if Noelle felt she owed Leah a debt of gratitude. Then she remembered how she had promised herself to put her wants aside for later. She had already thought that the Duchess could read her like an open book. Then the Duchess realized from her reaction that she had hit the mark. She also said that there was nothing wrong with devoting herself to the child, but it was dangerous to live only for him, and it could turn into obsession and strong attachment. She thought Noelle was a passionate and intelligent person, and thought she understood that everyone would be happy doing what they wanted to do. She thought the children sensed that. The life that parents put aside for their children, and the fact that it can be hard on them, and that it makes the children feel hurt and guilty. Seeing Noelle's puzzlement, she just wanted to say that everything had to be in moderation, and her life and her child's upbringing had to be balanced. But Noelle thought it was quite difficult. The Marquise questioned whether it was okay to do that, because at this point in her life, Leah was her only joy. Even now, she was sad to see her playing with the other children. But was it possible that the day would come when she would be entirely dependent on her daughter? Suddenly, she would be placing another burden on her. The Duchess said that if she wished, she could give her a little guidance. She spoke of the fair-haired boy Leah played with, and said she saw him very often in the infirmary. It seemed like they were just playing childish games. Noelle thought maybe he was traumatized a lot. The Duchess said no, and explained that his mother was treated here, and he was just like any boy walking around with the usual bruises. He played here while his mother was being treated. His mother's name was Charlotte, and every time she came to the center, she met her. So one day, she decided to find out what was wrong with this girl, and she told her that she often tripped and fell. The Duchess asked if she needed her help, but she refused and started avoiding her. She offered to help her, but she refused, and wouldn't even listen, so Noelle suggested that she was a victim of domestic violence. The Duchess said that unfortunately, even her neighbors were talking about it, and Charlotte would not comment on it because she was afraid of her husband, and of course they had no proof. Noelle reminded her that she was from a noble family, and it would not be a problem for her to send one person to prison. The Duchess said that nothing would work until Charlotte decided to end the situation herself. The fear of violence would drive her for the rest of her life, and Noelle agreed with her. The Duchess got up from the bench and stood across from Noelle, saying that she was the only one who had listened to her and agreed with her words. All the other people who hadn't experienced this kind of thing only said that it wasn't worth it to take the fight out of the house. The Duchess wondered if it was right to leave Charlotte in such a situation and wait for her to deal with it herself. For everyone around her told her she was wrong, and sometimes she thought she was being a nuisance. But Noelle disagreed and thought she was doing the right thing. Noelle asked her why she had told her, and then the Duchess said that she was embarrassed to ask her, but she wanted Noelle to talk to Charlotte. She couldn't handle it, but maybe Noelle would be able to talk and convince Charlotte. Noelle apologized, but since she had a small child, she wanted to live her life as reasonably as possible without getting involved in someone else's. The Duchess knew that she was a broad-minded person, and she had saved her life and showed it. But Noelle said she just knew what she had to do. But the Duchess took her hands and thought it was impossible to accidentally save a person's life. Then the Duchess began to assure her that if she went and helped Charlotte, neither she nor her daughter would ever be in a dangerous situation, for they would be protected by her son. Then Noelle indignantly said she would not do it, for she was not so good-natured. Noelle couldn't understand why she asked for her girlfriend, whom she had seen twice in her life. Rise said that she had been looking for a like-minded girl for decades, because everyone thought she was strange, but Noelle shared her views, so Noelle was like a diamond in the rough. The Duchess trusted her and offered her the hand of friendship. As you get older, you get a better sense of people, and one day Noelle would realize it too, so 2 meetings were enough for her to understand. Leah was delighted to play with her peers. She had a lot of fun because it was the first time in her life that she played hide-and-seek and also rode on the swings. Noelle smiled and realized that they should have met earlier. She remembered how the Duchess had told her that she had confidence in her, and she was a very good person, and she liked people like Noelle. Then she took her daughter's hand and asked her what the names of her new friends were. Leah said that Eddie was 7 years old, and Wendy and Mars were 6 years old. Leah also said that Eddie often played hide-and-seek at home, but Noelle didn't really understand it. Then Leah looked around to make sure no one was near them and told her mom in confidence that Eddie played hide-and-seek at home because his dad sometimes turned into a monster. Noelle sat down with her daughter and asked if he had told her that. The daughter said that Eddie hid in the closet until his daddy turned normal, and then his mom would let Eddie out of the closet. She also said that when his daddy was regular, he treated him well and promised him every time that it would never happen again. But he never kept his promise, and Eddie said that his daddy was a liar. Then, after a little thought, Noelle asked if she would like to play with Eddie again, and Leah said yes if she would let her. Leah hoped that tomorrow would come as soon as possible, and she was looking forward to seeing her friends again. Noelle asked her if she would go to bed early then, but she couldn't believe how he had told Leah about it. Later, Leondo came to Noelle and everything happened just as Mrs. Reese had said. Noelle thought that the Duke was busy, and he answered yes and reached into his jacket pocket and tried to take something out. Leondo pulled a candy bar out of his pocket and sat down to give it to Leah. Noelle watched this and thought they looked like her niece and her uncle. Noelle was uncomfortable since he was a busy man after all, but Leondo argued that he wasn't, and besides, he personally wanted to help with the problem. Noelle thought that he was fair, simple, and outgoing, the exact opposite of Rupert. For if it had been her husband, he would have beheaded Eddie's father without a second thought. She decided to ask the Duke if they could put her husband in prison without Charlotte's testimony, to which he replied that it was against the law. He also added that the Ernst family would not stoop to such a thing, and if he, being a duke, allowed himself to do such a thing, the other nobles would do the same and more, and Noelle agreed with him. Then all Noelle had to do was talk to Charlotte. She also said that to get her to talk to her, she needed to get close to her, and she would go to the infirmary and try to start a conversation with her. But while she was away, Leondo had a very important mission to look after Leah. In the meantime, Rupert was in his office as usual, signing papers as a friend had broken his pen, and the ink had spilled onto the paper. Orden was also in his office with him and noticed that he was finding it harder to hold himself together, and Rupert confirmed this. After a moment's thought, Orden asked if he could find a victim, and Rupert asked not to be mistaken for a crazed serial killer. Then Odin apologized and asked if he could bring him the perpetrators. Rupert crossed his arms over his chest and said that he didn't feel that way because of the curse. Orden decided to ask what had made him feel that way, and Rupert said with a twinkle in his eye that his feelings had changed. Orden had no idea what could have affected him, and asked if it was about his daughter and wife, and Rupert looked away unhappily. Orden also thought he was remembering the moments they'd spent together, and he must have missed them, and couldn't think of anything else. But Rupert didn't like that truth and told him to shut up. Orden said that it was just emotions and asked the gentleman not to worry because they would not ruin his life, but Rupert already knew that. Then Rupert started writing again, and Orden asked if it would be better to give them up, and then the pen again failed to obey Rupert's hand. Orden went on to say that they could get a divorce, and that would be a good solution. Orden also said that he shouldn't have held on to the marriage after all, and he didn't understand why the gentleman was doing it because he could have just paid child support to his daughter, and he didn't think his wife would. But then Rupert flared up with anger and said his name threateningly and told him to mind his own business. Orden was shocked at his lord's reaction because he didn't want to part with them, but he kept pushing them away, and it was like some kind of contradictory behavior. He asked if it would be better to start moving forward without them than to stand in one place like this. Orden insisted that it would be the best thing for all three of them, and then Rupert wondered. At the same second, it was announced that Commander Bert had come to see him, and when he walked in, he said he was against the divorce. Orden was frightened that Bert had overheard their conversation, and Bert said that he had only been eavesdropping since he had said that divorce would be a good solution. The deputy, correcting his glasses, hoped he hadn't heard anything about the curse. Bert said he had always felt that he interfered too much in the Lord's affairs, just like an annoying mother-in-law, and he didn't understand why the hell he had brought up divorce. Orden didn't understand why he had to be compared to his mother-in-law, and yet he had just offered a reasonable solution. Then Rupert couldn't bear it and asked what had brought Sir Bert here. Bert said that there were witnesses who had seen the gargoyle on the estate and in neighboring villages. Rupert ordered them to go to the knights to discuss the matter with them and to get the squad organized. When they left the Lord's office, the commander told Orden that if he talked nonsense, he would be kicked out, and Orden sighed heavily and said he knew it. Bert decided to ask him again why he was suddenly talking about divorce, because they used to have a little trouble with his wife. But lately their relationship had leveled off, and things would get better if each of them tried a little harder. But Orden thought that not every family could be brought out of a crisis like his. Bert thought he meant to say that the Lord's family would never be happy. But that wasn't what Orden was saying, and he said that the Marquis himself didn't want that. Bert had a different opinion. He thought that the Lord just wanted a peaceful life, though perhaps he didn't realize it himself. Orden thought he had forgotten what Mr. Rupert was called. Bert explained that it was all because he had not been able to live a normal life before. He had been through a lot, and he hoped that in the future he would be able to get things back to normal. And now that he had feelings for his wife, the chances were better. Orden couldn't believe that it looked as if he was interested in his mistress, and Bert said yes. You'd have to be a fool not to notice it. Bert also thought that he was just hiding his feelings even from himself for the time being, but that he would soon show them, and the mistress would understand. Rupert looked out the window at the tree where his wife was playing with their daughter. The day would come when Rupert would no longer be able to restrain himself. Bert was looking forward to it, and hoped that the Lord, Lady Noelle, and little Leah would live happily together. But Orden realized that Bert didn't suspect the curse, so he said so. Meanwhile, Noelle had found Charlotte with the help of the staff. She knew she needed to talk to her, but she didn't know how to start the conversation. She couldn't just come in to say hello and ask right away about her husband beating her. Suddenly, the door behind her opened and out came a woman asking for help. Her baby was not breathing. Noelle quickly realized that he had cyanosis, which was accompanied by a blue-purple discoloration of his body tissues due to a decrease in the amount of oxygen in his blood, which led her to believe that something was interfering with his breathing. The doctor thought he had something stuck in his throat and needed to try and get it out, but Noelle thought that if they did something wrong, they would only make him worse. The doctor said they just didn't have any other choice, but Noelle was adamant that they did and that they could use the Heimlich technique. And then she remembered that it didn't happen in their reality. So she approached the girl and asked her to trust her with her child. The doctor only now decided to ask who she was and wanted to stop her, but Noelle had already taken the baby and put it on her lap and started patting it on the back. The mother of the child and the doctors didn't understand what she was doing and wanted to stop because they thought the child was in pain. When one doctor wanted to stop her, the baby started crying and spit the bead out of its mouth. Noelle handed the baby to its mother, who tearfully thanked her, and Noelle was happy that her baby was okay. Then the doctors ran up to her and were shocked by her actions and the fact that this was the first time they had seen her here, and soon thought she was a new healer. She asked them to calm down and said she would explain what it was. After a few minutes of explanation, the doctors left satisfied and left her alone. She was, of course, glad that she had saved the baby's life, but she hadn't been able to talk to Charlotte, so she had to look for her again. Suddenly, Charlotte approached her, realizing that Noelle was from a noble family, and she didn't think she should talk to her. But she wanted to know where she had learned it all. Noelle told her not to worry about it, and thought she was from another kingdom, so it wasn't a lie. She said she'd just had a little experience working in places like this infirmary. But Noelle didn't understand one thing about the question. Then Charlotte turned up her sleeve and asked if she knew how to get rid of bruises quickly, because she was always hitting things, and she often got suspicious looks when she came here. Noelle thought she wanted to cover up the bruises. The Marquesa thought it was a good chance to find out. She said she would tell her everything she knew. That evening, the Marquise returned home with her daughter, and they were getting ready for bed. Leah asked if she had saved someone today, and her mother was surprised how she knew about it. Her daughter said the Duke told her, and he also said it was amazing. She thought her mom was the best, and she was proud of her. Leah also noticed that when her mom did something like that, she was happier. Noelle was amazed that even a small child could see that, and she realized what a problem it could be for a parent to sacrifice for their child. Leah loved it when she helped people, and how happy she was when she did it. Noelle hugged her daughter and thought that now it was just as Mrs. Rise had said her daughter could feel everything. Her daughter also said that she wanted to be like her mother. She wanted to help people. Leah said that she would also be happy and she would not be forgotten. Then Noelle hugged her daughter even tighter and said that no one would forget about her anyway. Then Leah said that she had been ignored and ignored before, and only a shadow answered her. She also sadly said that the room at home was big, empty, and scary, so she liked it better here and hoped her mom liked it here too. Noelle told her daughter that it was enough to have her around because she was her most precious treasure. So she didn't have to wait for that time to come because she already shone brighter than Noelle. But Deja didn't even know how to put on a bandage, and then Noelle said it wasn't a problem and it was more important to be willing to help and be brave. Also, she shouldn't try to turn a blind eye to what was going on around her. Even if it was scary to start something new, she still had to take the first step. Noelle knew she was the bravest, and Leah was her precious daughter and a shining star in a dark sky. After that day, everything went smoothly. Noelle was able to talk to Charlotte, and she told her that her husband told her that she didn't know how to do anything, and if it wasn't for him, she would have starved to death. Noelle was able to bond with Charlotte much faster than she thought. She even forgot that she was from an aristocratic family, and maybe it was because they were practically the same age and had young children. Noelle had told her that wasn't true. She'd invited her to the infirmary under the pretense that Leah wanted to play with Eddie, and after a few meetings, she'd finally talked about her husband. Charlotte said that everyone around her was saying that it was her fault that her husband was hitting her, and saying that he wouldn't have done it if she hadn't provoked him. Noelle at this point wished all those smartasses would fall on the spot. Charlotte said that as soon as he sobered up, he apologized and said he wouldn't do it again. Noelle realized that she just wanted to believe her husband, but it would take a lot of effort to change, and if he wanted the best for her, he would never let himself raise a hand against her. Charlotte worried if she left him that she would be able to support Eddie on her own, and Noelle said with certainty that she could. Noelle knew that if she left her husband, Mrs. Reese would help her with the work. Then Charlotte cried, but with a confident look she seemed to have made up her mind. The next day Charlotte came joyful and said she had done it but was badly beaten. Noelle of course realized that this alcoholic fiend would beg her to stay, and then Charlotte told him how it had happened. She told him that she and Eddie were going to move out and live separately, and she spoke louder than usual. It was the first time she had been able to stand up to him like she had grown wings, because it had been almost 10 years since they had been married. But it was the first time she had felt like this. Now she could finally stop lying and tell the whole truth. Noelle thought it was a great idea, but suddenly someone called out threateningly to Charlotte. It was her husband's voice. Charlotte didn't know what to do, and Noelle said they would just wait it out here. But suddenly, her husband screamed again and said that if she didn't come out, he would kill himself and Eddie. Noelle couldn't believe that he had decided to take his own son hostage. But the realization came to her immediately that Eddie was playing with Leah while they talked. Then, for the sake of their son and daughter, they decide to come out of hiding. A little while earlier, Leandro had been walking with Leah not far from the infirmary. He decided to talk to her about the wonderful weather, but Leah looked at him and saw her daddy and thought about it. She loved spending time with Mammy and Eddie and Duke, but they had left Papa alone in that big house, and so she was worried. Leandro was strange to see that today the girl was very quiet, and then she thought she was sick, but she said she wasn't sick. Then she asked the Duke if he was busy, because every time she and her mother went to the infirmary, he stayed with her. Then she reminded her that he'd been asked to keep an eye on her. Leah thought that he must have had a lot of important things to do because he was a duke and could not be busy with such trifles, and then Leandro said that he had time for her. Leah said sadly that it was good that he had breaks, but her father always had a lot of work to do and always looked tired. Leandro decided to ask what kind of man her dad was, and then she told him with admiration that she had his eyes like rubies, and everyone said her dad was very strong. Leandro thought about the fact that he knew a red-eyed and strong man and realized that he was a real demon. Leah assumed they were friends, but he said he thought he had a daughter just as cute as Leah. Suddenly, someone called out to the girl. It was Eddie calling her to go for a walk. Leandro let the girl go for a walk, but asked her not to leave the playground. Then she found a bench and decided to watch the kids from there. When he got to the bench, he sat down and saw that Leah was not among the children, but she was with Eddie, and he thought that while he was walking to the bench, they had run off somewhere. Suddenly, he heard a man's voice calling Charlotte and ordering her to come out. At that moment, Eddie's father was standing in front of the infirmary, holding him with a knife, and next to them was Leah. The man was screaming like a madman, trying to find where she was and threatening to kill himself and his son if she didn't come out to him. Then all their friends ran away and Leah was left alone, but she knew that she could not run away because she could not leave her friend in trouble. The girl quickly realized that she had to call for help, but then looking for help, she saw the Duke standing not far away, and she couldn't understand why he wasn't doing anything. Then looking at Eddie, she realized that if he came over, Eddie could have been hurt. At that moment, Charlotte and Noelle came out of the infirmary, not realizing what the psycho was doing. Then Noelle saw her daughter and showed her that she didn't want her to get involved, but Leah thought she had to be brave, and her duty was to save her friend. So she gathered her courage and approached the man and began to distract him with conversation. At that moment, when he was confused by the conversation, Leandro started to approach him from behind, but the man saw him approaching him and ordered him to step back and held a knife to his son. Then Leah did something no one expected. Like a wild animal, she pounced on the man's arm and bit him, telling him not to hurt Eddie. He waved her off after a second, and then Leandro was able to get close enough to him to twist him. Noelle immediately ran over to her daughter and asked how she was feeling. Then Leah stood up and said she was fine. She stood up, shook off her hands, and said her knees were just sore from the fall. Behind her mom, she heard a man coughing, and Leah asked what it was, but Noelle wouldn't let her look behind her and told her to ignore it. Then she ran up to Eddie and the Duke asking how they were. Leandro told her not to worry because her friend was fine. At that time, the wounded man decided to reach for his knife, but he was overtaken by Noelle, who raised his weapon. Holding the knife in her hands, she asked him if he understood what had happened to Charlotte all this time, and if he had any humanity left in him. The man indignantly decided to ask who she was and how she could get involved since Charlotte was his wife and she was obligated to obey him. Noelle didn't hear him and told Charlotte that it was her last chance to do something to him. He also yelled that it was his child and she shouldn't have cared. But all Noelle said was that she would then punish him herself. She started to walk over to the man and told the Duke to close her daughter's eyes. He knew she was angry, but thought maybe she shouldn't have done it. Then pulling up her skirt, she swung her leg, saying that in his next life he should be a kind and polite man. After she beat him, Leandro realized it was better not to mess with that lady. It had been a few days since the incident with Eddie's father, and Noelle was still working on her daughter's knees. As she did so, she worried that she'd be scarred, but her daughter told her not to worry about it. Then she remembered how she had asked her daughter why she had acted so rashly, and Leah had replied that she was just being brave to save her friend. The Marquise thought about the fact that the girl had put herself in danger, and how she could not be angry even though she had really done nothing wrong. Then she decided to leave her thoughts and went to her daughter and asked her what she was writing, and she replied that it was a letter for her father. Noelle was very surprised, and Leah thought she wasn't allowed to write, but Noelle said she was, and then she started writing. Noelle was very curious about what exactly her daughter wanted to write to him, but she said it was a secret, but she still wanted to peek. Then Leah ran to the exit of the room and said it was a secret and she wasn't allowed to look. Noelle wondered why she had written to Rupert, and she really wanted to peek. But she pulled herself away from the door, for she was a grown-up and wise woman, and she could not behave like a child. She knew she had to respect her daughter's personal boundaries. Leah took crayons and listed all of her mother's grandmother Rise and the Duke, and remembered that the Duke could ride a horse. After a while, this letter was ready, and she thought that if Daddy was scared, she would send him this letter, and it would betray to him her bravery, and she wasn't going to tell Mommy what she had written. But soon after looking at the drawing, she wondered why Daddy didn't love her and Mommy. But when he gave her this teddy bear, she was very happy, and she wished Daddy would love her so much. The next day, Orden brought Rupert a letter from Leah. He was surprised, and holding the letter, he thought that she must have something to complain about, and if he had not been paying attention to Leah as before, he would have ignored the letter. But he opened it. In the letter, she said hello to him and asked him how he was doing, and told him that she and her mom were having a good time. Then he started to smile at the thought that they were having a good time. She also told him how Mama had defeated the evil uncle, and Rupert realized that his wife was in trouble again. Leah also wrote that Mama was now a busy person, and that everyone around her was very fond of her. She asked him not to think that she was lonely because she was being looked after by her uncle the Duke. After that sentence, Rupert didn't realize who it was. Leah told him how much she had enjoyed her time there, and she hoped he had fun too. Now Rupert had a strange feeling and didn't understand how it had happened, because he remembered Noelle telling him that she just wanted to get closer to him. He didn't know what the point of his existence was, and that was the worst of it. Then he told Orden to bring him clean sheets, and he wondered what he wanted to write back. Rupert asked what was the big deal since it was a small part of his parental duty. Then Orden said he was just making excuses for himself. Orden went to get the papers, saying how he wanted to believe that things would work out, and meanwhile Rupert thought he should have done his best for Leah. Rupert saw that with the letter in the envelope was a drawing of the Duke she had written about. Then he swore, for he was not only spinning around them, he was sticking to them, but Rupert could do nothing about his curse. Rupert's mind was spinning with questions about where this man had come from and how close they had become, and the truth was that the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. Then Orden stood by the closet and, sensing something wrong, turned around and saw the gentleman in anger and asked him to calm down. Orden was very frightened and thought he had lost his mind, and then the gentleman told him that he didn't need the sheets, but the assistant didn't understand why. Then he said he would not write a letter to his daughter, but would personally go there to see them. Meanwhile, Noelle was dreaming again. She didn't know what place she was in, but she knew it looked like a warehouse. In the dream, she saw a group of black crows, and among them was Aaron, and she thought they were on some mission. Then she saw Aaron suddenly shouting to everyone to run, and there was an explosion right in front of him. From this horror, she woke up, and she realized that she had seen Aaron die, but she didn't understand because she was the heroine of the story. She thought that if she didn't do anything, she would die like in her dream. She started to think back and realized that there was nothing like that in the novel, and that's why she didn't understand anything. She had to find out why she had had the dream, and to do that she would have to meet Michael as soon as possible. He was the most famous archmage and one of the strongest saints in the Empire. He had been working with magic since he was 3 years old. But to Michael, he was first and foremost a living person, and the only one she could always rely on. She thought he must have been busy, so she thought that even if he came, their meeting wouldn't last long. But it would be enough for Noelle just to know what was going on with her. A maid came to the Marquise and told her that the Duchess and Duke Ernst had arrived. When she went down to them, Leah had already greeted the Duke as well, and it seemed to Noelle that the Duke had come here just to meet Leah. The Marquise thought she wanted to distance herself from them, but she couldn't refuse to meet them when they were already here, and she hoped that seeing Rupert or Aaron would make a difference. At tea, Rise saw that Noelle didn't seem to be feeling well as she didn't look well, but Noelle claimed she was fine. Rise then said that she could share anything she wanted with her, even if it seemed uncomfortable. Noelle must have noticed that Mrs. Rise was an attentive and wise woman. Then she said something was bothering her. She shared that Leah had recently sent a letter to her husband, but she didn't know since Leah said it was a secret. Noelle also said they were never really close, but this letter she didn't even know what to think. Then Reese asked why not just ask Leah about it, but for Noelle that was the problem. Or rather, she was the problem. Noelle was afraid to hear that Leah would want to go back to her father. What if it was true she couldn't go back to that house? So she was afraid to imagine what her answer would be. It was funny that they had just recently talked to Leah about how important it was for a man to be brave, and she knew that Rupert hadn't changed and wouldn't be able to take care of them. Then Reese said that if her husband used force on them, she would personally bury him. But Noelle was quick to say that wasn't the problem. Noelle didn't even know how to explain to her what the problem was if she asked, but then her maid burst into the room and had something to tell her mistress. Then the maid came up to her and said that there was such a thing as Mr. Rupert had arrived. Noelle decided to ask if the maid was sure that Mr. Rupert had arrived. She didn't understand why she was here, and if something had happened to Aaron after all. She decided to ask the maid where the Duke was, and she said that he and Mrs. Leah were playing in front of the house. Then Noelle realized that she had a chip and an SOS situation, so she apologized to the Duchess and left. She ran as fast as she could because she realized that if they ran into each other, it would be a total nightmare. When she got there, she saw that they had already collided. Rupert asked what he was doing here, but Leondo had the same question for Rupert. A little while earlier, Rupert had been riding in the carriage and was very nervous. His knee even twitched, so she pretended to pull herself together and crossed her arms over her chest. But it didn't help, she started to twitch, and he couldn't understand why he was so nervous, because even during the meeting with the monsters, she didn't worry so much because he was only going to his wife and daughter. He didn't know what he was going to do when they met, but a couple months ago she had been nothing but trouble, and it was funny how things had turned out. Yet now, for some reason, he decided to remember her thin lips, her green eyes like emeralds, and her beauty. He wanted to see her. The kingdom of Durin and Romster bordered each other, and they often had to face common problems. Among those problems were slave trade, theft, and smuggling. For this reason, informal meetings were often held between the kingdoms. Rupert and Leandro had estates near the border, so they went to these meetings and the results were usually bad. Rupert said that they had first met after they had resolved the issue with the bandits on their borders. Leandro said that if he hadn't thrown the bodies of those bandits to the wolves, he would have had no reason to turn against him. But they continued to argue, and Noelle watched and didn't understand why they couldn't stop, because Leah had heard everything. Then Rupert realized that Leah had written to the Duke, and he didn't know what the Duke was up to, but he ordered him to let his daughter go now. Leandro didn't understand what he was doing because he was a cruel man, but to kidnap a child was too much. Rupert didn't understand what he was saying and how he could forget who he was. Leandro decided to remind him that in the kingdom of Durin, child abduction was punishable by law. But Rupert thought that a jerk like him didn't have enough power to punish him. Finally, Noelle decided to intervene and told them both to stop. When Rupert saw his wife, he could not admire her beautiful red dress and her beauty. Only Rupert said her name. Caliando told Noelle to stay away as it was very dangerous. Then Rupert flashed his eyes and said she would have to explain herself. Then she realized how awkward it was. She didn't know whether to tell the Duke that Rupert was her husband, for she had already thought of divorce after moving here. Then he introduced her husband and Leah's father to the Duke. At the same moment, Leandro looked at Rupert and turned his gaze to the smiling Leah and said that it couldn't be. But Rupert didn't understand how he could say such a thing. Leandro couldn't understand how he could have such an adorable baby girl. He just couldn't believe it. After a couple of minutes, Leah said she realized they were friends because it was the first time Daddy had ever talked to someone for so long. Now, after they figured out the situation, Rupert told the Duke to leave his daughter and get the hell out of here. But Leandro decided to mess with Rupert and asked Leah who she liked more, him or Rupert. Then she turned to her father and quickly whispered something to the Duke. Then he decided to ask again if the Marquis was sure it was his daughter. Then the Marquis got angry again and thought he was a bastard for saying he was her father, and he couldn't understand if he was deaf or dumb and how many times he had to repeat it. Later, Leandro and Riza Ernst decided to leave, but she said that if anything happened, she had to tell them. As they left, Reese irritably asked her son why he was causing trouble in someone else's family. Noelle thought everything had ended happily, and they should have sent Leah home and dealt with the Marquis. Noelle asked why he had come, and he asked why he should have had a reason to come to his villa. Noelle realized that no special reason was needed, but she was curious, and then Rupert said that he had come on business, so he had a reason to be here. Then she reminded him that just now he had claimed otherwise. Then she thought it was because of Leah's letters, but he immediately flared up and said there was no such thing. Then she realized he wasn't the kind of man who would come for his wife and daughter. There was no way he would have come here of his own free will, and there were just those who cared. Then she realized it was someone from the Black Crows, and Rupert nodded. He also said that he had no idea when she had made friends with them, but in short, if something happened to her and her daughter in a foreign kingdom, there would be a lot of commotion. Noelle thought with a smile on her face that since they were worried about her, they were doing fine. Her dream had not yet become reality, or maybe it was just a nightmare. Then Rupert began to complain that the knights had gotten so cocky that they had asked him to come and see them in person to make sure everything was all right. And Noelle mockingly asked him how he could have come all this way just because of their requests. Then he looked at his wife and saw her once again in a special way. He looked at her with a certain amount of tenderness, and he didn't notice how he blushed and thought that there must have been other reasons. Leah looked at him carefully and thought that he was strange and blushed too. Usually, Rupert didn't stammer when he spoke, but every time she asked him the reason for his coming, he tried to avoid answering, though he usually said whatever he wanted to say. Now she was embarrassed that the Marquis had deigned to come to her. She wondered if he needed her at last and took a step towards her husband with a hopeful smile. Blushing once again, Rupert stammered and thought it might as well be called that. Rupert didn't want her to misunderstand him, but Noelle beat him to it and realized why he had come and told him to follow her. They went to her room and she told her husband to go through and went to the dresser to get something. Rupert did not understand why they had come here, for he had said nothing. While she was leaning on the nightstand, a hairpin fell off, and she turned to hold up a strand of hair that was falling on her face and told him not to be shy and to come over. He was shocked and fascinated by how beautiful she seemed to him at that moment. Then he blushed and decided timidly and hesitantly to tell Noelle honestly that he had feelings for her. But then she pulled out the papers and held them right up to his nose and said she knew why he was here and she had it all ready. It was a divorce petition. At this point, Rupert burst through the couch in anger. She didn't understand why he did it. And then he ripped the papers out of her hands and she reached for them, not realizing what he was doing. And he angrily said he was the one who should have asked her about it. He didn't realize what it all meant. She said she'd already talked about it and she'd already signed it. She'd just decided to do it in advance to save him time. Rupert realized that she didn't want his opinion. She tilted her head and said that he had come for this and it was not easy, and she knew it, so she had made the first move. But Rupert only got darker, and she didn't understand what was wrong with him, and she thought she'd done something wrong. Rupert was still annoyed and didn't understand why she was in such a hurry to do it. Then she repeated that she didn't want to waste his time and thought he had come for it, but he said no. She asked why he had come and what other reasons he might have had for coming here. Then, out of anger, he crunched the paper to a crunch, which scared Noelle, and she, not knowing what was going on, suggested he talk. He saw her start to tremble, but he didn't want to scare her. She stood there wondering what Leah could have written in the letter she thought she had written about the Duke, and she herself had so many questions. If the Marquis had asked Noelle directly, he would have revealed his true feelings, so he didn't. He laughed to himself, calling himself a fool for getting angry over some documents. Then he said he wanted to clear up some things about their relationship first, and tore the papers in half, saying he would never divorce her. Noelle didn't understand why, and he said he hadn't even thought about it. Noelle was confused and said she didn't understand him. He reiterated that he didn't want a divorce. Then she asked what he wanted from her, but he didn't understand what he meant by that. She said that he had hardly come here because he missed his wife and daughter, and asked him to tell her the truth and without any excuses what he needed. Then he lowered his eyes and said that he wanted her and Leah to come back to their home. She was surprised and would have liked to hear such words, but she realized that it couldn't be true because he hated them. But he told her it wasn't true. But it didn't matter to her now, and they weren't going back. It was suspicious to her that he had suddenly come here and asked them to come back. Then he couldn't hold back what was in his heart and said frankly that he thought he didn't care where they were or who they were with. He figured if they were apart, he'd forget them quickly. But he was wrong. Noelle thought it might have been nothing more than a momentary weakness, and said that if that was all it was, her answer was still the same. Then he almost coaxed her in a low, husky voice, saying that life in their mansion would be more comfortable for them, and there were few maids, and the house was smaller. Noelle confirmed that the villa was tiny compared to his mansion, but the size of the house was no reason to return. She remembered how Rupert had made her promise and broken it, and now he'd come and asked them to return. But she had made up her mind that he could no longer influence her. Then she said that she wasn't going to come or go because he said to do it because she wasn't a dog. She wasn't going to hide that she was willing to bow her head if she forgave her past mistakes, but that didn't mean she would immediately melt and run to him. Then she confidently reiterated that neither she nor Leah would ever submit to his whims again. So she asked him to leave and leave now. After this conversation, she went out into the garden and realized that they had met after all. Up to now, she had tried to avoid conflict with Rupert as far as possible, for it might have been a matter of life and death for her. But today, she couldn't do anything. She didn't know when Rupert would change again. It was strange to her that he had just walked away obediently after her words. She'd expected aggression in his direction, or poisonous jokes, or maybe he didn't have any malicious intent. Then she went to Leah, and the maid said that there were others in her room already. Noelle thought Rupert had come alone, but when she entered the room, she saw Sir Hillis and Aaron playing with Leah. After Leah fell asleep sitting at the table, Noelle decided to ask how they were. Then Hillis thanked her and said they were fine and asked her how she was and if they were settled in. Noelle also noticed that his leg was healed. By the way, Sir Hillis wanted to know where Rupert was, for they thought the commander was with her. Then Noelle, fixing her hair, said that not long ago they had been talking, But he had made her angry, and she had told him to leave the house, and then she had gone away, but she had no idea where. Then Hillis thought that Mr. Rupert had lost this fight, and then Sir Aaron decided to ask if the lady was all right. Noelle thought they were blindly following their favorite commander, but Hillis confirmed that most knights did, but he and Aaron thought differently. Aaron also said that he respected the commander, but he liked her and the young lady a lot, and he hoped they didn't believe the rumors that the knights didn't have their own opinions. Then Noelle was delighted at what she heard, and thanked Sir Hillis and Sir Aaron for those words. Noelle also decided to ask how things were at Anal Manor, and if they had much work to do. Sir Hillis said that if she was talking about the appearance of monsters, then it could not even be called work, and she could not worry, and Mr. Rupert did not plan to return soon, so they would stay here for a while. Then Noelle was shocked that he wasn't coming back. Aaron thought he wasn't the type to give up his goal so easily. Noelle couldn't believe it. She didn't understand why he had to waste his time, and why not just go back to the manor. Sir Hillis was sure that his concessions to her were a tactical move, and he was well versed in it, so she should have been on her guard. But the Marquis thought it was nonsense, and why he should have done it in the first place. Sir Aaron also supported Hillis. He also said that she had nothing to worry about since they were outnumbered and on her side, and the Marquis dominated the relationship. But the Marquis still couldn't accept that Rupert would be here for a while longer, and thought that the knights could persuade him to go back, but they only laughed. In the end, Hillis and Aaron were right. Rupert never left and stayed with them all this time. Then Noelle began to think that perhaps it was because of his feelings for her, but she quickly dismissed the thought and realized that it couldn't be. She didn't know what to do, and she wasn't going to go along with it. She knew there was only one outcome, and that was divorce, and then it was time to use her trump card. The Marquise decided to come to Duchess Riza. Noelle was pleasantly surprised that she wasn't disappointed to learn that she was Rupert's wife, and it wasn't surprising considering Rupert and Leondo's relationship. Rize looked at her and assumed that she was concerned that she and Leon knew what Rupert was really like. Noelle apologized for keeping who her husband was from them, and she should have told sooner. But Rize felt that she shouldn't have apologized, and she understood why she hadn't. Rize also said that she had never personally interacted with Marquis Anel, but she could not help but recognize his talent for business. She also often thought that it would be good if Leondo combined his sharp mind with Rupert's ability to strategize. Then Noelle decided to ask if her offer of help was in force, and the Duchess said it was on the table. Then she asked what was wrong. She thought it must have had something to do with the Marquis. Before leaving Rize, they had already agreed on everything, and she hoped the Duchess would do the right thing. Noelle sat in the carriage and thought about how good it was that the Duchess had agreed to listen to her, and now all she had to do was to declare war on Rupert. Meanwhile, Rupert strolled in the garden and remembered Noelle's words that she and her daughter would no longer obey him. He realized that if she came back, he would probably never see them again, and he needed time to get what he wanted, and he needed to stay here. Then he saw his daughter looking at the bug and decided to approach her. He called out to her and she got up quickly, and he didn't know what to say. But then he remembered that he could have told her that he had gotten her letter, but she was crying, and he thought he had said something wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Then Leah said she thought he was angry with her because of the letter. Then he sat down to his daughter and said that he wasn't angry, and then Leah said that she and her mother had had a fight about the letter, and Rupert realized that she blamed herself. He said that he and his mother hadn't had a fight, but had just misunderstood each other and that she and her letter had nothing to do with it. But Leah knew he didn't love her, and he realized that she was talking just like Noel, and he told her she wasn't. Then the little girl was quick to believe it and asked him, since he wasn't angry with her or fighting with her mother, why he had come. Rupert was distressed that, in her opinion, there was no more reason why he should come. He didn't understand why she had such a bad opinion of him, and said that he didn't have to come because of anything bad. Then Leah said with interest that he had come then because of something good, and he realized that he couldn't lie to a child and adults weren't supposed to do that. He said that when he had received her letter, he had wondered how they lived without him, and that he had come and seen that they lived well without him. Then Leah reached out and put her hand on his shoulder with a smile and told him that he was jealous because Mom had a friend. He didn't know it himself, but he must have been, because as she could see, her father didn't have any friends, and her mother was much more successful at it. And then Leah said that, to be honest, she thought he was bored, because he was always alone, and he agreed with her. He said he was really bored and lonely, so he decided to check on her and her mom. Leah began to believe that her father had really come here for them. Then Rupert nodded and said that he missed them very much, and Leah was very glad to hear that, and laughing, she threw herself on her father's neck and said that they would keep it a secret from her mother, but that she wanted to see him too. These words were a little, no, even a lot. They were very nice to hear. Suddenly, Rupert heard that voice again, the voice that told him to kill. The voice wanted him to kill his daughter, to break her thin neck, and he wondered how hot her blood was. But Rupert was stronger and hugged Leah back with trembling arms and told her how grateful he was for those words. To slow down the spread of the curse, he no longer wanted to suppress his emotions. He couldn't give up like this. He was bound to find a way to defeat this curse, and then he could live a full life and get back everything he had to give up. Noelle returned home and told Rupert that she wanted to talk to him as much as he did to her. She wondered if he'd decided to go back, but he said it was the other way around. Noelle recalled that he had always driven her away in her eyes, and now he felt it in his own. Rupert then said he had a decision to make. But Noelle didn't think she would believe him so easily and said that she wasn't going to stay with him anyway, and she thought about it and came up with a way. She said that they would play a game and that would determine the winner, and the loser would fulfill the winner's wish. Rupert asked if she was afraid that things would get worse for her. Then the Marquis said that's why she was choosing the game. Rupert asked what the game was. The Marquise replied that he didn't even know what she would choose, and that he had already made a winner of himself, and that she thought she was noble because she knew a lot of things, such as embroidery, playing musical instruments, or ikebana. Then Rupert said that her knowledge of a particular thing did not make her an expert in it. He also said that he was a quick learner, and was sure that he could learn all the skills he needed in an instant. He knew that Noelle knew that in his youth, he had lived with his mother the ordinary life of a commoner, so he knew how to sew as well as cook, because that was the base. Rupert thought that if she made a mistake in her choice of game, she might well lose to him. Noelle didn't want him to worry or think he could beat her. Rupert said that, unfortunately for her, he didn't know how to lose. Noelle wondered if it was permissible for a man who had done so much wrong in the past to behave like that, so she told him to listen. Then he was surprised she chose hide and seek. The Marquise said that the Ernst family was having a masquerade ball in a couple of days, and he was to find her among the guests before the reception was over. Rupert flared up again, and thought that if she and Leandro had decided to conspire, she should have thought of the consequences. Regardless of the reasons, he really didn't like her and the Duke socializing. Then Noelle quickly said that she had asked Mistress Reese to do it. Then he realized that she was in cahoots with her and had to admit that they had bonded quickly and she knew how to make friends. Noelle could see that he wasn't really interested in the details of the ball and should have realized that it would play against him, but Rupert didn't think it would be a problem for him. Then he complimented her on her cleverness with the Marquis, and that it was probably the most favorable place for her to be. She smiled contentedly, saying that she would not have chosen a game where he would have the advantage. Then Rupert was sure that his knights had a hand in it too, and he noticed that she had quickly gotten along with them as well. Rupert was frustrated that she wouldn't listen to him, but was willing to listen to their advice. She decided to give him some advice and told him to listen to his subordinates more often, and she thought they would appreciate it. He didn't understand what she was talking about because he treated them well, but it had nothing to do with the fact that she didn't listen to him. Then she said jokingly that he must have been jealous of Sir Aaron or Hillis, and he said yes without thinking. She didn't understand what had happened to him, but going back to their conversation, she repeated that if he didn't find her by the end of the ball, he would lose. And though it was the Marquis's first game, he was sure he could handle it, and Noelle wasn't about to give in to him, even though he was a novice. At that moment, their little girl came into the room and heard the hide and seek. She wanted to know if they were going to play together. And Rupert, not knowing how to explain, said they would play together. Leah ran up to Rupert and asked if she could play too. Noelle was surprised that she ran up to him and not to her. Rupert stroked the little girl's head and said he would play with her only a little later. But now he had to beat her mom. Noelle watched them and realized that while she was away, something had obviously happened between them. Leah thought her parents were going to fight again, but Noelle assured her that they weren't even going to. Then Rupert said they were figuring out who was going to play with Leah next. He sat down with her and said what he meant was that he too wanted to spend more time with her, but her mom argued that Leah wanted to play more with her. So they were going to play hide and seek with her mom and determine the winner, and Leah figured it out. Noelle, who was watching, saw Rupert speaking to her in her language so she could easily understand him. Then Leah asked Papa to play with her when they were done, and Noelle told him not to promise what he couldn't keep. Then Rupert was struck by her lack of confidence in his abilities. At last, the day of the masquerade came. Here, everyone was obliged to wear a mask until 8 o'clock in the evening, and during that time, Rupert had to find it. Rupert was much more sensitive than other people, and she thought it would be difficult for him to be in the midst of the crowd and the loud music. There was only one condition for this game, and that was not to leave the grounds of the mansion, and it would take 2 hours to go around the Ernst estate. But that wasn't all. Suddenly, the blonde maid pulled the other by the hand and asked to take the tray with wine to the hall. Thanks to Madame Reese's assistance, many people looked like Noelle for a while. It might distract Rupert, and he would lose track of her. The maid was carrying a bottle into the hall to the guests, and suddenly someone grabbed it and said she was caught. The man was drunk and realized he had grabbed the maid. The girl was so scared it was Rupert. Then she said that this hallway was for servants, and there was no room for guests, and she was going to escort him to the banquet hall. The man liked her sweet voice and wanted her to show him her face, but she said it was against the rules. Then he pointed to a corner of the hallway and told her not to be so cold and suggested that she hide so that no one would see them. Then the girl yanked her hand away and said to let her go. He swung his wine glass around in frustration because she was being impertinent to him and splashed the wine on her, but she didn't feel it. She was ready to be doused, but when she opened her eyes, she saw someone in a rabbit costume standing in front of her. The man didn't understand who he was either, and Noelle couldn't understand why he was helping her. The man doused the rabbit's mask and ordered him to take it off right away. He thought he must have been from a poor family if he had come here in something like that. Then the rabbit took him by his shirt and lifted him up in the air. The man started to ask him if he knew who he was, but the rabbit didn't care. Suddenly, someone called out to the girl, and when she turned around, she saw a bear who wanted to ask her for the bottle she was holding. The girl gave him the bottle, and he started hitting that rude man with it. Noelle thought the animals were rabid and said she would pretend she didn't see anything and thanked them for their help. And then she ran as fast as she could down the hall. She ran out into the hall, and standing behind a column, she realized that she only had an hour to live. Then she decided to walk, thinking that Rupert had given up looking for her and that he had no reason to fight so fiercely for her and Leah. Then she thought that if she won, she would laugh and throw the divorce papers in his face. Suddenly, she felt like someone was following her, and she spotted a rabbit at the end of the hallway. At first, he was just standing there, and she thought he was lost, and then he started running towards her. She was frightened and started running too, not realizing why he was chasing her. So she ran as far as the garden, but even here he almost found her, but she thought she had time to hide. After a while, she thought he was gone and wanted to get out from behind the bushes and check, but she came face to face with him. Then she ran again, but she came to a dead end and had nowhere to go. He quickly caught up with her, and she wondered if she was going to die at the hands of a giant stuffed rabbit. Suddenly she heard a voice that was pleasantly surprised that she had disguised herself so well. Then she recognized it as Rupert. And it was Rupert himself. Noelle was shocked that he was in a rabbit costume and emotionally couldn't understand why he was following her, for she was very frightened. But he didn't understand why she was scared, because it was just a cute rabbit. Then she hysterically shouted at him that if a huge, fluffy-eared carcass with a bloody face was following him around the castle, he would be scared too. Then she settled down on the floor to catch her breath and told him to take off the costume, and couldn't understand why he was dressed like that. Rupert told her that he was dressed like that because it was the perfect disguise, and he was always around, and she didn't even realize it. She thought he might have taken her by surprise, but why hadn't he done it before? But Rupert had his reasons for not doing it. He just wanted to change her perception of him. She'd thought he'd do the same thing, run around looking for her. But it was important to him that she realized that he really wanted to bring her and Leah home. It wasn't his whim, and he'd said so many times before, but she probably wasn't listening. He wanted to say that he was trying to change, but he himself didn't even know if he was doing the right thing, and so he felt like an idiot. Noel asked hopefully if he wanted to say that he really wanted to start over, and he said yes, even in such a stupid way. Now the answer was only for Noel, whether she wanted to go back with Leah to their house. But she realized that he had already won, but Rupert said that wasn't true, since he hadn't caught her, and wasn't thinking of forcibly taking them away. Noel realized that was why he hadn't caught her, even though he'd recognized her at once. Rupert wanted to show his sincerity, and he wasn't going to beat her. Then, looking at his watch, Rupert saw that time was about to run out. Noel didn't know what to do, and didn't understand why he had only now decided to show this side of himself. And at the same moment, he sat down with his hand outstretched to her and said that he wanted to apologize for his past self. He wanted to hear if she could forgive him. Noel thought it was so stupid of him to overstep his pride, because he always acted like he didn't care about anyone. It hurt her that he hadn't spoken to her like that before, and hadn't opened up to her like he did now. Rupert wished they could all go home together. She wouldn't care so much if he continued to be selfish and cruel. And then the clock struck 8 o'clock in the evening, and Noel went forward and gave him her hand and told him she could forgive him, and they would go home. Then they were walking hand in hand through the garden, and Noel decided to ask him where he had gotten the rabbit costume, and he said that Leandro had dressed his knights as animals and sent them to guard the banquet. Then Noel thought that the bear was Mr. Leandro's knight, but then Rupert said that the bear was Leandro himself. Rupert also said that he was just afraid that if the ladies recognized him, he wouldn't be able to walk a step because of the attention. Noel agreed, because knowing that the Duke was here, the ladies wouldn't miss the chance. She also realized that if he had given Rupert the costume of one of his knights, they had been together all along. She also remembered that they'd been on bad terms, but Rupert had brushed it off and said they'd bumped into each other by accident, and it wasn't help, it was a deal. Rupert had promised not to dismember the bodies of the bandits and not to dump them at the border. Noel thought that meant they were in cahoots, though who was to say she'd asked Mrs. Rise for help herself? Rupert said they weren't in cahoots. He'd only lent him the suit. The Marquise also decided to ask about the ladies who looked like her if they had confused him, and he said that of course they looked like her, but he didn't think it could have been her. The Marquise couldn't believe it and wanted to know how he had done it. Then he smiled and asked her to leave her alone, but she was still curious, but she didn't ask any more questions. He was surprised she wasn't going to question him more. He appreciated that she wasn't pushing him, but for some reason it made him feel so empty. Then Noel asked if he would answer her if she asked the question again. She wanted him to make up his mind, otherwise she might think that he might have become his past self again. But Rupert promised that would never happen. Suddenly Noel heard the nice music playing at the reception and said they couldn't just go back there, and offered her husband a dance as a sign of reconciliation. Rupert looked at her hand and remembered what it had been like when he had hugged his daughter. But without further thought, he walked over to her and swept her up into the dance. Noel thought his touch made her nervous, and maybe he really did love her. As they danced, Noel said he had one more test to pass, and he was curious to know what it was, but more on that later. They wanted to savor this moment of theirs. The next day, Rupert still had a problem. Noel told him that he had to convince Leah, and if she was against it, they would not return. He was even beginning to wonder if it would work. He went to his daughter's house and she let him into the room. She also asked him who won the hide-and-seek game, and he said it was Mom. Leah was even a little upset because she thought that now they would not be able to play, but Rupert reassured her that they would be able to play. He didn't think she was disgusted with him. Rupert also said that now he had to go home and asked Leah to listen to him. He wanted them all to go back together. She asked what he wanted her mom and him to come back, and then started crying and said she didn't want to. She puffed up her cheeks and said she didn't like it there. Rupert tried to find out why she didn't want to go back, but she said she just didn't want to. He thought that if she didn't like the house, he could remodel it, but Leah didn't want to. But he still couldn't guess what Leah didn't like about their house, and she finally said that in their house, she thought they would fight again, and so she just said again that she didn't want to. Then she cried again, and Rupert tried to calm her down, but he wasn't very good at it. After the baby had cried, Noel put her to bed. She left the room and told Rupert that she had never thrown a tantrum, and now she was being stubborn. She wondered if Rupert could handle it. Noelle wanted him to tell her something. If they went back to the mansion, would he be a good father to Leah? And he said yes. He had to realize that he couldn't act the way he had been acting before. He had to show Leah his love, support, and comfort her. He couldn't take it out on them again. Then Rupert said she knew it was all about work. But he turned to her and said he wouldn't make the same mistakes again. Then Noelle decided to tell him why Leah didn't want to go back. Then Rupert wondered if there was a specific reason after all. They sat down on the couch, and Noelle told him that she didn't want to go home because she was afraid it would happen again. She talked about Leah feeling abandoned, about her attempts to get attention, about how lonely she was. Noelle felt they were very guilty about their daughter. Then Rupert realized that they had moved here to start a new life. Noelle reassuringly said that she didn't hate him, and then he asked if Noelle still had those feelings, and he honestly said that there wasn't much left. Noelle wanted everyone to understand that their home was a place of warmth and comfort, not fear. For him, it was quite difficult. He didn't understand how to do it, how to turn their home into a joyful and cozy place. Then Noelle said that there was nothing complicated about it, and he just had to take care of Leah. Rupert was surprised that she knew him, and yet said it was easy. He still didn't understand what he had to do to make her happy. Noelle said that he wasn't such a destroyer and evil, and wanted him to stop thinking of himself that way because it upset her. Noelle could also see that he was scared now, and he was pleasantly surprised that she saw it, even though he didn't show it. She didn't know why inside himself he shut himself off from everyone around him, but he was wrong to think he couldn't make anyone happy. So she wished he wasn't afraid to show his love to someone, because it was never wrong and he was doing a good job of it. Then Rupert gave in to his feelings and gave in forward to his wife. But when she said it out loud to him, he pulled away and blushed, because he was always told that he was a bad man, and he realized that there was something wrong with him, and he could not afford to live a normal life. It was the first time Noelle had heard him talk about his past. She made Rupert feel that he was not hopeless. Then she said that he had been a perfectly ordinary man, and he was glad to hear it. Noelle had never seen him smile so genuinely. Now Rupert knew how to change Leah's mind. She had sent him the letter with the drawing Noelle knew for it, though Leah had not shown her the drawing. Rupert told her that it was a drawing of them all having a good time, except him. Noelle couldn't believe he'd come because of that. He also said that Leah drew Leandro next to her. Then Noelle remembered that he really didn't get along with the Duke. Rupert decided that he would do a return drawing and thought it would help, and Noelle thought it was a good idea. After a couple minutes, Rupert finished the drawing, and Noelle thought he was going to be angry because he was trying his best not to laugh, but he thought he was doing a good job. Then Noelle couldn't stand it and laughed and said that he could sew, he was good with a sword, and his hands were in place, but that he had never made friends with pencils, and said that he could grasp everything on the fly. Then he said he'd never tried drawing. Noelle, seeing her husband's agony, decided to help him draw, or a couple more of his strokes, and Leah wouldn't be able to recognize herself. Noelle knew that now Leah was not afraid of Rupert, and as a mother she had no right to ignore her desire to be with her father. Now they were finished with the drawing, and Rupert looked at it and said it was pretty good. When he wanted to go to Leah, Noelle held out her hand to him and said that this time they were to form a trusting partnership. Rupert turned away from her and told her that he had been forced to refuse, and although his plan was really to keep a good relationship with them, but she was offering something completely different and told her to try again. She didn't know how to take that he didn't want to be partners, but she didn't know what he wanted to be either. Suddenly, she thought that he didn't really want to be husband and wife. Rupert asked her if she would go with him, and she nodded, because if he made Leah cry, someone had to comfort her. Rupert promised he wouldn't make her cry, and Noelle wondered if things weren't moving too fast, since he hadn't even wanted to talk to them before. Meanwhile, they arrived at Leah's, and Rupert asked permission to go into her room, so she opened the door and ran to hide because she thought he would be angry with her for crying. Rupert said he had come to apologize, and how could he be mad at her? Rupert apologized and asked her to listen to him, but he was confused again, and Noelle told him to ask why she didn't want to go. He asked if she could tell him why she didn't want to go back. Leah had tears again and told him that it was scary there, and she and her mom would be busy doing their own thing all the time again. Rupert said it wouldn't be like that again, And Leah said that there they didn't play or talk to her, and here they could all be together. Then Rupert promised that it would be the same. Then he also said that he had written an answer to her letter and Leah was interested. Leah took the drawing and looked at it with her father and was surprised to see their family in it. She was glad that they were all smiling in the drawing because she had never seen them all so happy. Rupert said that if they came back, they would live just like the picture and he would never leave her alone again. Leah believed her daddy and hugged him, and now she didn't want to cry anymore. Then she pulled away from him and asked him if he had drawn it himself, and he turned to his wife and said that he had a little help from her mom. Leah thought that now they weren't fighting, and that meant that they were friends. But Noelle said that wasn't quite true, as they hadn't realized it, and Rupert immediately moved closer to her and didn't understand why she had only now decided to intervene, and Leah thought that they were fighting again, and then Noelle decided to show that they weren't, and hugged her daddy and said that she and her daddy were on very good terms. But it was at this point that Rupert had another seizure. Noelle did her best to show their daughter that she had nothing to worry about, and Leah was overjoyed and decided to go and frame the drawing. Noelle was just about to say that Leah's mood had improved when Rupert pulled away from her and told her not to come within 2 meters of him and hurried away. Noelle thought he could have hugged her gently, and she didn't understand what was happening to him. The very next day, Noelle said goodbye to Mrs. Rise and told her that she had never had such good friends before, and for Rise it was mutual. She hoped they would meet again. Rupert called out to her as they had to go and held out his hand, and she wondered if she should have given it to him, since he had only recently told her to stay away. He didn't understand why she wouldn't come near him, and Noelle repeated his words that he'd told her not to come near him. And he said that now was not the right situation, and now was the right time. She accepted his help and climbed into the carriage, wondering how to understand him now. When Leah fell asleep, Noelle decided to ask Rupert something. She asked why he didn't want her to come near him, but he had trouble answering, and she wondered why. Then she thought it might have been because of the curse, but she didn't remember it being in the book. Rupert said he didn't want to explain it, and then Noelle said that maybe he had gotten a girl he liked, but he resented that statement because why would he take her and Leah away? But Noelle wanted to tell him that it wasn't worth hiding if he had someone. He couldn't believe she was saying such a thing, and how could she think he would chase every skirt, and she shouldn't have thought that as a married woman. Then, Noelle realized that since he didn't love anyone, the curse was still in effect. In the story, Rupert and Aisha were supposed to be together, but the course of events changed when he and Leah left and thus survived. But if he really felt something for Noelle, she could make him fall in love with her and break the curse. Only she didn't see how she could be true love to him and thought that maybe she should have acted like a couple in love. Rupert didn't understand why she'd spoken up for it, and Noelle apologized and said she hadn't meant to hurt him. Rupert decided to agree with her about one thing, that she would have to take charge of the inner workings of the house when they returned. Since she was originally supposed to be in charge of that, Noelle decided to ask him if he was sure. Rupert nodded as it was a proof of his trust, and especially now her task was to make their house a place where Leah would not be afraid. Leah blushed and said she would do her best. Ainul's family had always been known for their quarrels, feuds, and suspicion. It wasn't a family relationship but a training ground, and the only thing she had to do was to give up on fixing things, but now she had a chance for a new life. Now she could live the life she dreamed of. When they arrived at the mansion, the first thing Leah did was show the drawing to Orden, and he thought Leah had drawn it, but she told him that her mom and dad had drawn it for her. Orden couldn't believe that her father and her mother had drawn it, especially together. Suddenly, Jenna ran up to them and apologized to Orden and told the lady that it was dangerous to walk alone with the heavy frame around the mansion, but Leah said she wanted to show everyone the picture, and the maid said she could carry it instead of Leah. So she handed over the picture and bowed and wished Uncle Orden a good day. Orden thought everything was upside down, and Lady Leah and Mistress Noel had been back at the manor for a couple of days now. He had been surprised when the Marquis had dropped everything and gone to see his wife and daughter, and he had been completely freaked out when they all came back together. And on top of that, he was surprised that the Marquis had turned over some of the estate's affairs to Noelle and asked Orden to help her. It was a no-brainer for him. Orden came to the Marquis's study and heard a noise, and when he opened the door, he saw Noelle and Rupert fighting, and he wondered if he had imagined it, and everything was the same. Putting the tea on the table, Orden asked them to finally calm down. He couldn't understand what they were arguing about, and it turned out to be about the incident he had reported this morning. An explosion had been reported this morning at Viscount Delphi's wheat warehouse. The explosion blew out the entire warehouse, and not just the two maids of Delphi's house and his nephew were found dead, and traces of magic were found at the scene of the explosion, and a suspect has already been apprehended. On the territory of Ainul's estate, it was difficult to farm, so the wheat reserves of Viscount Delphi played a big role for Ainul's family, and there was no doubt someone committed sabotage to harm Ainul's estate. So the Marquis ordered Orden to take some men from the Black Crows with him and go to the scene of the crime to find the culprit. But then Mrs. Knoll intervened and wanted to go with them. Orden felt he had to intervene and said he didn't understand why she wanted to go with them so badly, and Noelle said she just wanted to help with the investigation, but that was what he didn't understand. He asked what kind of help she could offer, because while they were busy with the investigation, they would be better off dealing with the affairs of the estate. Then she apologized to him and said that she and Rupert would settle the matter themselves. Orden had made it a point not to interfere in other people's affairs. Orden watched with mockery as she thought that Rupert would listen to her. He thought that now the Lord would order her to stay, and the situation would escalate even more. But suddenly Rupert told him that Noelle was right. He also said that Orden's words were presumptuous and stupid, so he kicked Orden out, and he went out into the corridor without realizing what had just happened. And even though Rupert kicked him out, that didn't mean he was ready to agree with Noelle. Then she asked him not to reject her for no reason and wanted him to name her. Then he said it was dangerous. Noelle also said that she just wanted to look at that warehouse and talk to the suspects, and there was nothing dangerous about it. Then Rupert sensed there was something wrong and asked why she was so eager to go there. Noelle realized that she couldn't tell about the dream and said that it just bothered her. In any case, the criminal would be brought to their estate, and she could ask him all her questions here. Then Noelle realized how stubborn he was. Then she had to use this method she didn't want to use. Noelle said that the criminal had to be sentenced to death to be brought to their estate and asked if he would be his executioner. Then he agreed, and Noelle said they had to study the case carefully or they could kill an innocent man without looking into it. Rupert said they had proof, but Noelle thought they should have checked it again, or he had other reasons to kill the man as soon as possible. He said there was no such thing, and Noelle thought she might have gone there. He might have thought that she had nothing to do with it, but when it came to their estate, it was directly related to her, because she was the wife of the owner of the land, so she wanted to do what she could to help. So he asked her to always be with the knights and Orden. She agreed, as he didn't want to get into trouble herself. This was her chance to find clues about the explosion from her dream. Orden thought she had gotten her way. Then she said he was right. Orden wanted to ask Orden something, and it was a great coincidence that she wanted to ask him something too. But before that, Noelle wanted them to go somewhere. They went to the gym. Noelle had heard that knights and mages were training together today. Then she saw that the mages were now using some kind of defense spell. Orden said it was a shield capable of protecting about 5 people. Noelle wasn't sure if that was its maximum size, and when she was younger, she had seen larger shields. The size of the shield depended on the skill of the mage, like all spells. Then Orden asked if she had seen Michael Barris's magic. Then she remembered him showing her his magic and saying he would protect her. Then, with a smile on her face, she said she had seen what Michael was capable of. Orden said that he was a great mage, and it couldn't be compared to anyone. However, she shouldn't have thought that the mages on the grounds of Ainul Manor were bad. The Marquis then said that she hadn't thought to compare them since she hadn't seen any mages besides Michael. Noelle reminded him that he wanted to ask her something. Then she asked if he wanted to know what she was up to. Orden noticed that she was mocking him, and he thought she was making fun of him. So she said that if he was going to keep suspecting her of something, she could do a lot worse than his hypocrisy, but she was being diplomatic. After all, Rupert had approved her trip, which meant that he, as his assistant, refused to bend to his will. So he bowed and apologized to her, saying that he had not meant to offend her. The Marquise accepted his apology and warned him to watch his words, for her patience was not infinite, and she would not tolerate such rude treatment. Whether he liked it or not, they were in the same boat, so he had to be a good boy. Then Orden asked if she thought the situation was strange. If the culprit had already been caught, what was the point of all this? Noelle asked him to clarify it because he was very easily caught. At the time of the incident, there were 3 mages living in Delphi Manor, and it would be easy to identify the culprit. The only mage who could have set the warehouse on fire was her. Noelle thought it was the ultimate sabotage against the Marquis, but the culprit was quickly captured, and it seemed odd. Orden thought that maybe she was right, but so far everything matched the evidence. Noelle suggested that maybe someone else was responsible for the warehouse explosion. Then Orden said she sounded like she knew something. She said she did know something but would tell him when they got there. The next day, Noelle wanted to take Leah with her, since she wanted to go with her mom and said she would be a good girl. Noelle apologized to her and said she wished she could take her with her, but she couldn't this time. Sir Aaron came up to her and was surprised that she was here so early. Noelle was so uncomfortable that he always had to accompany her, but Aaron said it was a sheer pleasure to serve her, and she didn't have to worry. Orden came to them with another knight and introduced that it was Knight Laurent Delphi, the 3rd son of Viscount Delphi, and he would ride with them to the scene of the accident. Noelle had forgotten that Aaron and Hillis had been so kind to her, but there were many people who were hostile, such as Laurent. She reflected that Laurent was related to Viscount Delphi, and she understood his anxiety over the incident, and yet the situation was becoming increasingly awkward. Sir Aaron called out to the lady and said that Sir Hillis had asked him to give her something. She said that Sir Hillis said he could not accompany her this time, but asked her to take care of Sir Laurent, the youngest of the knights, and asked her not to drive him away. Aaron would ask that too, which Noelle was surprised to hear. Leah and her husband also came to see them off. Leah ran up to her and wished they would come back soon, but Rupert stood aside and couldn't seem to find the words. Then he came over and told her to be careful. In the meantime, they had arrived at Delphi Manor, and Noelle told them to tell the Viscount that she would refrain from greetings and they would go to the scene of the accident at once. When they arrived, she asked how they knew that magic was involved, and was told that there was a special substance that reacted to magic. And in the presence of magical flows, it turned blue-green, and they had checked the place right after the fire. Then Noelle asked if it was possible to know what kind of magic it was, and Orden said it wasn't, as it was only possible to know that magic had been used. Looking around, she asked if this warehouse was the same as the others, and was told yes. Then she decided to check something out, and that would be the end of it. Orden was surprised that it was so quick, and wanted her to tell him. He wanted her to tell him what she had said earlier, that the warehouse could have been blown up without the use of magic. She said they could have used the flower trick, but Orden didn't see what that had to do with the explosion. Noelle said she would show him, but she needed something first. She asked Orden to fetch water from the well, and he thought she was just trying to get back at him. Yet he really was wrong, and now they were worthy adversaries. While Orden was carrying the water, he and the knight made a fire, and Noelle said that now everything was ready. She showed Orden the fire that was burning as usual, and there was nothing out of the ordinary in it, and then she pointed to the plain flower from Delphi's estate. Then they poured some flour into a sack and gave it to Orden, saying that he should try to throw it into the fire. When he got to the fire, Noelle warned him that it was a little dangerous, so when he threw it, he should move away. So he threw the bag into the fire, and the flames got so big that he stumbled and fell. He was surprised that the fire got bigger. Sir Aaron put out the fire with water, and Noelle asked now he saw what she was talking about. Flour could ignite instantly, even at low temperature, and the bigger the space, the bigger the explosion. She also said it wasn't just flour that could be used. Orden wondered how she'd figured it out, but she figured there was no reason for him to know. He realized that all her guesses were confirmed, and if it wasn't really about magic, they had found traces. Then he realized that those marks were from protective magic, and Noelle nodded. The Viscount's nephew kept an eye on the warehouse, but didn't lock it because the warehouse was under protective magic. Orden thought that it was logical to think that the explosion had been set off with the help of magic, and then they immediately thought of a mage who could use such magic. Orden thought that someone was trying to frame the mage they had caught. Even someone who could create a small shield could do it, and now all 3 local mages were under suspicion. Noelle was now hoping for Orden's help, and he now understood why the Marquis had been chasing her so much, and promised that he would give his best. That Shuna sorceress who had been imprisoned was in bad shape. She was a hard-working commoner who had graduated with honors from the Academy of Magic, and surely no one expected something like this from her. Noelle came to Shuna and said hello to her, but the girl didn't realize who she was, so Noelle introduced herself to her and told her that she was the wife of the Marquis of Anal. Noelle sat down and said that Viscount Delphi was subordinate to the Anal family, so she had personally come to look into the matter. She also said that at this rate, Shuna was facing the death penalty and she turned even paler. Noelle also said that she could hardly handle it alone and asked her to point out her accomplice so she could help her avoid death. The girl said she hadn't done anything, but Noelle slapped the table and told her not to lie to her since she was the only sorceress on the estate who could use explosive magic. She started crying and asked her to believe her that she didn't do it. Noelle asked as she offered to believe her, since she would be remembered as a murderer after the final verdict. She had also heard that she was acquainted with the other 2 mages on the estate. The girl confirmed that they had graduated from the same magic academy together. Noelle had heard that they had even been on a trip together, and the girl had said that they had separated halfway through, and Noelle also knew that they had gotten along well. The girl remembered that time with a smile and said that because she was a commoner, many people looked down on her, but these 2 were kind, even though they were of noble descent. Then Noelle said honestly that she had not come here to interrogate her, she had come to offer her a deal. It would be a real tragedy if they lost such a sorceress, and she could exonerate her at will. But in return, she had to name one of her friends who would be punished in her place. The girl began to tremble and said that she could not agree to this, and the Marquis asked why she could not go for it. Then the girl said that she had offered her a deal because she thought she was guilty, but she wasn't, and she wouldn't let her friends down in exchange for any privileges. Then Noelle asked if she was refusing the deal, and the girl said yes. Noelle left the prison with Aaron and said she pressured her as hard as she could, but she insisted on her innocence. Even in a situation where she could lose her freedom, Shuna wasn't willing to frame her friends, so she didn't think she was the real culprit. So Noelle went to the Delphi mansion, and Laurent was furious that Noelle was covering for a criminal and thought she should have been executed as soon as possible. Noelle asked Orden if he had explained the whole situation to Sir Laurent, and Orden replied that he had explained it to him and Viscount Delphi. Noelle realized that a relative of his had died, so he couldn't judge sensibly. If there were rumors that Viscount Delphi's 3rd son was feuding with the Marquis's wife Anal, nothing good would come of it, and Noelle was sorry that Aaron wasn't here. So she asked the maids to clear the room. Noelle said firmly that if he wanted to argue with her, he should have argued and not be too emotional and not act like a child. Laurent said that the evidence was on the surface and didn't understand why he had to dig and fumble with the case. Noelle once again reminded him that he had heard the reason from Orden. Laurent knew there were other ways to blow up the warehouse, but that didn't disprove the fact that that girl had done it. Noelle thought that if there was a chance it wasn't her, it was worth investigating the case thoroughly. Then Laurent said he thought she had plenty of time and nothing to do. And Noelle told him to choose his words, because she could be wrong too, but she didn't take it lightly. It seemed to her that the only one who didn't care and who wanted to get rid of the problem was Sir Laurent, but he thought it was nothing of the sort. Noelle felt that they had to do their best because the life of a possibly falsely accused man was at stake, and that was why she took it so seriously, and she wasn't going to take that sin on her soul. But Lauren didn't want to dig into the case and was ready to slit the girl's throat right now. And she wondered if he knew that meant he didn't want to catch the real culprit, he just wanted to get angry. Noelle approached the knight and asked who was in the wrong in this situation, her or him. He could treat Noelle any way he wanted, but he should not show his dislike in this situation, because there could be trouble if he gave in to his emotions, and as long as he was a knight of Anal's family, he should act accordingly, and if he couldn't, he should be silent. When she left, she started waving her hand in the air, and Orden asked if she was all right, and she asked if he was not the one who should have calmed Laurent, and he didn't understand why because he was a big boy, and Laurent had crossed the line, and he should have thought about his behavior. The Marquise hoped that he had heard her, and Orden had also said that even though she was young and hot-tempered, he was not a fool. Then Orden also praised the Marquise, saying she was good. Now he thought they should hurry up and get down to business. Orden asked if it was worth bringing the suspects to Anal's dungeon and interrogating them. Noelle said that if her plan didn't work, they would try it. Orden was surprised that she had already thought of something, and she said they would set a trap. Suspect number 1 was Joan, and suspect number 2 was Diana, who claimed that Shuna wasn't the type to hurt people, and it had to be for a reason. Marquise said that's why they wanted to set up a test and she needed their help. The guys started to ask what they could do, and Noelle said there was nothing dangerous about it. She just needed to find out some things. Soon they came to a warehouse, and the guys didn't realize where they had come to, and Marquise said she had rented the warehouse to do an experiment, and this place was perfect. Then Joan said that they weren't as skilled in magic as Shuna and didn't have explosive magic. Noelle told them not to worry, and they wouldn't have to strain themselves. They went into the barn, and the Marquise asked what they thought about how the magic was used, because she didn't know anything about it, so she didn't even have an idea. Diana came over and looked at the warehouse and said that to blow up a warehouse like that, you had to use a spell in the center of the warehouse. Suddenly, the warehouse doors closed, and Joan was scared and didn't realize what it was. And Noelle herself didn't know, and thought the watchman hadn't noticed them and closed the door. Noelle ran to the door and started calling for anyone who might be outside, and realized they had to open the doors. And then she saw the flour start to scatter. They all started coughing because there was a lot of flour in the air, and Noelle asked them to use fire magic, and Diana was about to use it as Joan stopped her. Diana asked why he stopped her, and he blurted out that using fire magic here could be dangerous. Diana told him not to worry because she was going to create a small fire and control it, but Joan said it could easily start a fire. Diana said that she was not a novice, so she would not let that happen, or they would be better off standing in the dark. Then Joan covered Diana's mouth and pulled Noelle to him. Noelle couldn't understand what he was doing. He said if she used fire magic, the whole place would blow up. Noelle realized he was caught and pretended she didn't understand what that meant, and Joan said fire and flour would explode. Noelle asked him to elaborate, but the guy said he shouldn't have paid attention. Noelle was deciding what was worth paying attention to, and asked how he knew about the flour, and the guy said that they did similar experiments at the academy. Noelle asked what those experiments were and when it was, but the guy didn't remember the exact dates. Noelle decided that in that case Diana must have known about it too, and asked her to let her go and tell the truth. Joan said it was an experiment he was doing alone, and no one knew about it. Noelle understood that if there was a loud explosion as a result, someone must have heard it, but the guy said it was during vacation and he was alone in the dormitory. That's when she clapped her hands and said that he'd said a minute ago that he didn't remember when he'd walked him out. Noelle realized he was already having a hard time lying and decided to end it. She said that the warehouse had blown up Joan and then set Shunu up afterward. That's when he pushed Diana off on Noelle and she fell into the flour sacks. He used fire magic and was going to kill them, and with his other hand he prepared a defense spell. When he threw the fireball, it just died and fell, and nothing exploded because it wasn't flour. At the same moment, the Black Crow Knights entered the barn and they grabbed the bastard. He didn't understand why nothing exploded, and Noelle said that not everything that looked like flour was flour, and there were some powders that didn't ignite, and there was marble powder everywhere that was resistant to heat. Marquise didn't understand why he blamed Shuna for everything since they were friends, and then he said it was unfair that she was better than him. Diana only now found out what his thoughts had been all along. After a while, Shuna thanked Noelle for being able to clear her name. Marquise was glad everything was okay, and she decided to apologize for pushing her so hard. But Shuna didn't want Marquise to apologize since she had acted wisely, and it was awesome. The Marquise wondered what she planned to do next, but to be honest, Shuna was halfway to the estate where she was offered a job after graduating from the academy, but after being imprisoned, she received a letter that her services were not needed. Noelle thought that now that the charges had been dropped, they might take her back. It was possible, but Shuna wondered if it was worth it, because it was unlikely that she would be happy there and she could be constantly poked in the nose about the fact of her imprisonment. Simply put, she was now a black sheep. Then the Marquise offered her to go with her to their estate. She also said that her husband didn't care much about someone's status, as long as they were capable. Then Shunu's eyes sparkled, and she thanked her for it was an honor to work for the lady who had saved her. Then Noelle said she was relying on her. There was a knock at the Marquise's door, and Laurent walked in, and she could feel an oppressive aura from him. Noelle noticed that he was a little angry, and Laurent said that he was a little pissed off at him. Noelle asked what brought him to her, and then he bowed and apologized. Laurent admitted that the Marquise was right, and the culprit was indeed someone else, and he had almost made a mistake because of his emotionality, so he came. He was sorry that he had criticized the Marquise, thinking that she had only done it out of boredom. Such behavior was unforgivable for a Knight of the Black Crows, and besides, He had always wanted to become an outstanding head, but he still had so much to learn. Noelle understood him and asked him to raise his head and asked how old he was, and he said 17. She hoped then that he had realized his mistakes and would not repeat them. She also asked him to listen to her request that when she needed an escort, she would like him to go with her, and apologized for allowing only Sir Aaron and Hillis on this mission. Meanwhile, Rupert was signing the papers again and almost broke his pen as he was trembling again. He realized that the curse was getting stronger and that whatever he had done, he would have to kill again. But he was disgusted. He heard someone walking towards his office, and he opened the doors ahead of him, and behind them was his little girl. She was surprised that he knew she was going to come in, and then he told her to be careful, because the door to his office was heavier than the other rooms. Leah asked her daddy if he was busy, and he looked at the stack of files on the desk and turned to her daughter and said he was free, and she wanted him to play with her. And when Leah wanted to hug her dad, he put his arms out in front of her and wouldn't let her do it, and she was upset that he didn't want her to hug him. And her dad said that he just wasn't used to being in such close contact with people, so he couldn't tell her about the curse. Leah wondered why that was so, and he told her that his parents had died early and he didn't hug that much. Then Leah said he needed more hugs to get used to it. He didn't know how he could give that up, so he said he would start to get used to it slowly and lifted the girl into the air. He took her in his arms and hugged her, and then Leah said he would get used to it faster and asked her mom to hug him too, but he said it was already hard. Leah said that she wanted to play hide and seek with him, and he was going to drive, but suddenly he saw something and said that they should play another time. They went to the window, and Leah asked why another time, and he asked her to look out the window, and there she saw that her mother had come back. Rupert and his daughter came out to greet Noelle, and the baby ran up to her mom and hugged her. Noelle asked if everything was all right, and Leah said yes, and they were just about to play hide and seek, but came down to meet her. They came up to Rupert and they greeted each other gently, but Leah wanted them to finally hug. Then Leah said that Papa had promised her to practice hugging. Orden came to the marquee and said that a sinner had been brought to him, and Rupert told his wife and daughter to go inside. Joan was brought to him, and Rupert asked the assistant if he had been sealed with magic, and Orden said yes. He also asked if he had been tortured before, and was told he had only been interrogated, but there was no torture. Rupert told them to let the man go, as it was a strange situation. Rupert asked him to raise his head, but he started coughing and releasing magic, and then Rupert told everyone to leave. Noelle had a strange feeling that something had happened to Rupert. At the same time, the prisoner just burst and splashed the marquee. Everyone started running to him and told him to bring a healer. Marquis tried to come to his senses, but the smell of blood on his face really beckoned him. Suddenly, from behind, he heard the voice of his wife running towards him. She did not understand what had happened, but as soon as she wanted to approach her husband, he stopped her and told her not to come. He was shaking, and Noelle asked him if he was hurt, and he said he was fine and told her to leave. Noelle realized that nothing was okay and walked over to him and touched his face. She asked him to look at her and told him to think of something good, and if he didn't, he would only get worse. She wanted him to think of memories that made him happy. Then he remembered meeting her as a child, and it made him feel better, and he didn't want her to take her hand away. But he asked her to go back to the house and calm everyone down while he and the knights put things in order. In the evening, Noelle discussed with Orden the situation that had happened in the morning, and he said that it was not a pretty sight, but no one was hurt. Noelle wondered how it could have happened, but Orden didn't know, and since there was nothing left of the body, they couldn't even investigate. He had a hunch it looked like the prisoner's body had been enchanted so that it exploded at the Marquise's touch. In any case, the situation was very strange, and he thought that she needed to be wary for a while too. In the meantime, Rupert was sitting in the garden, and there Noelle found him. He asked why she was awake, but she had the same question. She said that she had gone in to see him and saw the window open, and she asked if he had gone outside right through the window, and he said yes. Then Noelle started telling him that it was dangerous because his room was on the 3rd floor. He said he'd be more careful from now on. Rupert motioned for her to sit down and asked her why she was looking for him. She didn't understand what that meant because she was worried, and he had seemed very worried during the day. She hoped he was feeling better now. Then Rupert said with a smile that he was in a better mood because of her. She was glad to hear that, and if someone had been torn up in front of her, she would have surely fainted. the moment her hand touched his, he had the strength to endure it. She was glad they were alone, otherwise he might not have been so understanding. Then she said she had heard that the warmth of another person at such times was very soothing. He was sure it was because of her, and quickly turned away as he blushed. Noelle didn't understand him, as first he told her not to get close to him, and now he was saying such things she couldn't understand if he was flirting with her or not. She decided to figure it out and asked him if he was attracted to her, and he had to answer as he had 5 seconds, or she would run her hand through his hair. He asked her to take her time, but the countdown was already started, and he thought it was something stupid. Then he turned away and said he didn't like to be touched. Noelle couldn't believe that he believed that excuse would work on her, because after all they were married and had a daughter. He was grossed out by the situation and thought she should be embarrassed by it too. But Noelle wasn't the least bit embarrassed. She told him to stop prevaricating and wanted an answer. Then he mumbled that he couldn't get used to it. She didn't understand what he meant, and then he timidly repeated that he couldn't get used to liking her. He hoped she was satisfied, and now she didn't dare touch his hair. She didn't stop there and decided to ask what part of his body she was allowed to touch, and he exhaled loudly and couldn't understand why she kept making him blush. Then he seriously said she was allowed to touch his hand, and then they held hands, and she couldn't believe he was flirting at that age. He could never understand why she always came to him, and she replied that she did because he was her husband and she was his wife. Then he thought she wanted his body. Then she said he was a fool, they were family, and she wanted to connect with him and get to know him better and hear his story. She wanted him to tell her what he liked about himself, or what he thought and dreamed about. He said he would try to share it with her. Now that she knew Rupert was in love with her, she couldn't rush things, and it had been a long time since he and Leah were supposed to die like in the original story. Rupert said he'd heard she'd pulled a dangerous stunt to lure a criminal into the warehouse by making herself a decoy. Noelle said that she wasn't a decoy, and she'd just trapped the bastard, and luckily everything had turned out well, and they'd been able to hire a talented employee. He also thought that if their relationship continued in that direction, his curse would no longer be a threat. He asked her not to repeat such feats in the future because it was dangerous, but she couldn't promise that. These were fateful words. Noelle had made a mistake that all humans often make, and she would soon find out. In the morning, Noelle received a letter, and Leah wanted to know what it was about, and it was an invitation to a ball. It was a social gathering where people exchanged information or created new gossip, and Noelle was considered a kind of villain. Everyone would be there to discuss her, but she couldn't always hide. Now that she had adapted to managing the inner workings of the family, it was time to take care of things outside the house. Suddenly, Leah said she wanted to go there too. Noelle thought it was a good idea for the three of them to go to the ball, since they couldn't create only bad memories for her. Leah had to swear on her little fingers that she would always be there for her, and if she met any strange people, she would scream. Noelle thought the social events weren't so bad, and it was a great opportunity to socialize with her peers, and Leah was incredibly sweet, and it was impossible not to fall in love with her. She also thought it would be nice if Rupert agreed to go with him, and the day would come when he would want to go. Noelle saw another letter from the Opian family she had been born into, but she did not understand why they had sent her a letter. Leah saw that her mom didn't read the letter and told her it was just trash. But as it turned out, there was another letter that made her eyes sparkle. Then there was a knock on Rupert's door, and he was greeted with a smile by Noelle, who looked happy. Noelle thought she was, and he went into the study and sat down in a chair. She said that she had received a letter from Michael, and he said that he would arrive in the capital and they could finally meet. Orden's eyes sparkled as he was interested in his arrival, because, as he said, a genius saw a genius from afar. Noelle teasingly said that his genius was coming out of his mouth. Then he said she underestimated him. She didn't understand why she had to imitate Michael when he had Mr. Rupert. Then Orden said that Mr. Rupert came first, of course. Rupert then told Noelle to stop imitating Orden and told Orden to stop too. The Marquis also noticed that after the trip to the Delphi family's property, the two of them had somehow gotten closer. Then the Marquis said it was all because of him. And by the way, she wanted him to reconsider his schedule because they had received an invitation to the ball. The Marquis blushed at the thought that she wanted to go to the ball with him. Noelle began to worry that he didn't have time, and if he did, he could have sent any of his knights who knew etiquette, and she thought Sir Aaron was perfectly capable of doing that. But her husband didn't understand why him. Then she said that she had come closest to him. But Rupert immediately said he would go to the ball himself. So Noelle went off to pick out an outfit. Her husband was Rupert Anal. He was cursed, and only true love could break the curse, and she worked at it. But it was all to no avail, because he wouldn't even let her hold his hand, and it wasn't like a family relationship, but a flirtation. The day of the ball came. Noelle chose similar outfits with her daughter and asked her husband's opinion. Rupert looked at them and said that they looked good and harmonious, and he felt superfluous against them. Noelle realized that she had forgotten all about him while she was busy with her daughter's outfit and her own, and said that next time she would be sure to take care of his outfit. She also noticed that he had changed his hair and thought it looked great. Noelle also wanted to know what her daughter thought of his hair, and she happily said he looked handsome. Then the three of them went to the ball. Rupert had also long wanted to ask his daughter why she always called Noel Mammy and him Daddy. She answered simply because he was her daddy. Then he suggested she call him Daddy, but she still called him Daddy. Then he suggested Daddy. Then Leah said that Daddy was Daddy. Rupert thought he was being bullied, and then the Anal family went to the ball. When their family came to the ball, all the guests were shocked, and no one expected to come together. Everyone saw a girl with golden hair and recognized her as Lady Anal. Some thought that they would never see her, as well as some said that their family never tried to pretend that they were doing well. Noelle couldn't believe they were discussing her in front of her. She also didn't understand why they pretended to whisper if she could hear everything they said. Noelle didn't think it was a good idea to bring Leah here, and Rupert could see that his wife was getting nervous. Rupert also told his daughter that if anyone bothered her, she was to tell her dad, and Leah thought he would scold them, but he said he would make sure they never bothered her again. Noel joked that he would just bury them in the garden. Suddenly, Rupert was being hiccuped by some men, and with a heavy exhale, he said that they wouldn't get away from him, and Noelle and Leah would be better off going to the hall. Then she listened to him and said they would meet later. The Marquise decided to ask her daughter if she was hungry, and then some mysterious girl called out to her. It was Carla, the wife of Count Hopin, and they had often crossed paths with her in social circles when she was younger. One of the reasons Noelle was considered a villain was because they used to tear each other's hair out at every reception. You could tell this was the first time they had met together instead of bumping into each other, and she also thought Carla wanted to settle their conflicts. Then Noelle decided to act as friendly as possible, and Carla was thunderstruck. She didn't understand why the Marquise was calling her by her first name. So Noelle pretended to be innocent and said that they had called each other by their first names before they were married. Noelle told Leah that it was her friend Carla Hopin and asked her to say hello. Leah made a bow and introduced herself. Carla also said that Lady Einel had changed a lot since the last time they met. Noelle asked her to forget about the past Noelle, as she now had a daughter and needed to become more mature and serious. Carla thought motherhood was an amazing thing, and she had changed so much that she felt like she was talking to a different person. Then Noelle said she was about to experience it herself since she was pregnant. She also thought it would be better for Carla to sit down because it was obviously hard to stand. But Noelle could see from her face that her concern for others shocked her. Then Carla suddenly softened and said that it wasn't so hard that she couldn't stand, and that the due date was just over 2 months away. Then Noelle wished her that the baby would be born healthy, and then Carla decided to leave. Noelle hoped she hadn't shocked her enough to give birth right there. Leah turned back and asked her mother if he was her friend or acquaintance, and then Noelle saw a man who said hello to her and was glad they had finally met. Marquise didn't understand what the hell he was doing here, so she hid Leah behind her and asked the man what he wanted. Goth didn't understand why she said that, and wasn't she glad to see her brother after all these years? But she said she didn't miss him one bit. He also said that she had ignored her parents' letter, and becoming the Marquis's wife had made her too arrogant. Then he saw his niece, but Noelle told him to stay back, and said it was her and the Marquis's daughter, and they were higher in status, so for now he was just asking. Goth almost threateningly told her not to get cocky, as she was only half of her husband, so how dare she order her brother around. Then Noelle said just as threateningly that he should have been more careful with his words. Then the Goth laughed hysterically, saying that she would always be just a cheapskate. Leah, on the other hand, at this point was already starting to fear him and began to shake. He thought it was a sting, for if she had not been the Marquise's wife, he would have painted her face as before. Then he took Leah's hand and dragged her to his room, saying that he just wanted to meet his niece and that his uncle had no right to do so. Leah started to call for her mom, and Noelle slammed her fist into his face, telling him to get his hands off her daughter. Then Goth leveled himself at her and called her a fool and said he would teach her a lesson. And at that moment, she remembered how he had bullied and beaten her as a child. When he decided to take a swing at the Marquise, Rupert was there to tell him not to be so presumptuous. Rupert said that if he'd known that such a jerk would be around, he wouldn't have left their side. Goth decided to show how important he was and pointed out that he was older than the Marquis, and he dared not speak to him like that. Then Rupert couldn't stand it, and without any effort hurt Goth's arm as his old bones just couldn't take the strain. Then the Marquis leaned over to him and told Goth to be thankful that his wife and daughter were here, or he would not have gotten off so lightly, and threatened that if he ever came near any of them again, he would make him unable to walk for the rest of his life. So Rupert threw him aside and told him to get lost, and then he went over to Noelle and she thanked him for his help. He admitted he shouldn't have left them. Leah wanted her daddy's arms, and he picked her up, feeling her shaking, and Noelle said she was really scared and it would be better if they went home. Leah asked again if the scary man was her uncle. Noelle said she didn't have to call him that and apologized and promised she wouldn't let it happen again.